The stagecoach that brought Evelyn Vale to Red Hollow arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks late, and covered in so much trail dust you couldn't tell what color it had been originally. The driver, a leather-faced man named Dutch, who'd been running the route for 12 years, pulled the horses to a stop outside Milligan's general store and climbed down with the stiff movements of someone whose spine had given up arguing with the road. "Got a passenger for Mercer," he announced to no one in particular. It was 4 in the afternoon, that dead time when the sun turns everything the color of old brass and the heat sits on the town like a hand pressing down. A few people glanced up. Mrs. Hodges, who ran the boarding house, paused in her sweeping. 2 ranch hands leaning against the livery stable straightened slightly, their curiosity the lazy kind men get when nothing interesting has happened in weeks. The stagecoach door opened. Evelyn Vale stepped down, and the afternoon changed texture. She wasn't what anyone expected. Mail-order brides were supposed to arrive like packages, neat, predictable, designed to fill a specific need. They were supposed to be young women with scared eyes and decent figures, girls from crowded eastern cities or played-out mining towns, women desperate enough to marry strangers but still pretty enough to make that desperation look like romance. Evelyn was none of those things. She was broad-hipped and heavy through the middle, her body built for work rather than admiration. Her traveling dress, dark wool, practical, already showing wear from the journey, pulled tight across her shoulders and hung loose everywhere else, like she'd borrowed it from someone else's idea of what she should look like. Sweat darkened the fabric beneath her arms and at the small of her back. Her face was round, flushed from heat, framed by dark hair that had given up maintaining any style somewhere around Kansas. She was, by the standards of Red Hollow in 1877, plain. And worse than plain, she looked tired. Not the romantic exhaustion of a delicate flower wilting from travel, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been running too long with too little rest. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the street, the buildings, the faces watching her. Looking for threats, looking for exits. Mrs. Hodges' broom stopped moving entirely. At the livery stable, one of the ranch hands, a kid named Tommy Peterson, who was 17 and stupid in the way that only 17-year-old boys can be, let out a low whistle. "Jesus," he said, not quite quiet enough. "That's Mercer's bride?" His companion, an older hand named Bill, elbowed him silent, but the damage was done. Evelyn heard it. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look toward them, just reached up to accept her single leather bag from Dutch, who handed it down with studied neutrality. "Mrs. Hodges runs the boarding house," Dutch said, his voice carefully even. "If you need somewhere to wait." "I don't," Evelyn said. Her voice was low, Eastern Mountain flat. "Tennessee, maybe, or Kentucky. Mr. Mercer's expecting me. He's out at the ranch, 3 miles north. Someone can fetch him." "I can walk." Dutch looked at her for a moment, this tired, heavy woman in her dusty dress, carrying everything she owned in one bag. Then he nodded. "Straight up the main road. Can't miss it." Evelyn shifted the bag to her other hand and started walking. Behind her, the town began to whisper. Sick. Silas Mercer was fixing a section of fence on the eastern pasture when he saw the figure approaching up the road. At first he thought it might be Bill or one of the other hands, but the walk was wrong. Shorter steps, heavier weight distribution. He set down his tools and stood, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. The figure resolved into a woman. His woman, he supposed, though the word felt strange and presumptive. He'd placed the advertisement 4 months ago in a fit of practical desperation. He needed help running the ranch, and hiring hands cost money he didn't have. A wife, on paper anyway, made more economic sense. He'd been honest in his advertisement, at least. No illusions about romance or comfort, just facts. Working ranch, hard labor, isolation. Must be willing to endure difficult conditions. No drinkers, no complainers. 40 acres, a house that didn't leak too badly, and a man who wouldn't hit her. 3 women had responded. 2 had changed their minds after he'd written back with more specific details about exactly how hard the work would be. Evelyn Vale had written simply, "I accept. I'll arrive in September." Now here she was, walking up his road in the afternoon heat, and Silas felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Not disappointment exactly. He hadn't expected beauty or youth. But she looked so tired, so used up, like the frontier had already chewed on her before she even arrived. He started down from the pasture to meet her. Evelyn saw him coming and stopped, setting down her bag. She didn't primp or adjust her dress or do any of the things women usually did when men approached. Just stood there, feet planted, chin level, waiting. "Miss Vale," Silas said when he reached her. Up close, she was shorter than he'd expected, but broader through the shoulders. Strong, probably. Her face was flushed, streaked with dust and sweat. "I'm Silas Mercer." "I know," she said. An awkward silence opened between them. Silas wasn't good at this kind of thing. Social niceties, courtship talk, whatever the hell this situation called for. He gestured vaguely toward the house. "It's not much. 2 rooms, kitchen, roof's solid. Well, water's good. Better than most around here." "I don't need much." Another silence. Silas picked up her bag, heavier than it looked, and they started walking. The house sat about a quarter-mile off the road, a simple structure of rough-cut timber with a porch that sagged slightly on one side. Nothing fancy, but Silas kept it maintained. Roof was good, like he'd said. Windows had glass. Walls kept out most of the wind. "You'll want to rest," he said as they approached the porch. "I set up the bedroom for you. I'll sleep out here until we're properly married, I mean." Evelyn stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and there was something in them that made Silas deeply uncomfortable. Not anger exactly, something colder than that, more permanent. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I read your advertisement. I know what I agreed to. You don't need to pretend this is something it isn't. You wanted help running a ranch. I need a place where people can't find me easily. We both know what this arrangement is." The bluntness of it felt like a slap, though Silas couldn't have explained why. Maybe because it stripped away the last thin pretense that this was anything but a transaction. He told himself he was fine with that. Hell, he'd been the one to structure it that way in the first place. But hearing her say it out loud made him feel smaller somehow. "Still," he said after a moment, "you traveled a long way. You should rest." Something flickered across Evelyn's face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion, but it was gone before Silas could identify it. She climbed the porch steps, her movements careful, like someone conserving energy. Silas followed, pushing open the door. The inside of the house was sparse but clean. Silas wasn't much for decoration, but he'd made an effort before her arrival, swept the floors, cleaned the windows, put fresh linens on the bed. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, and a cast-iron stove. A door on the far wall led to the bedroom. Evelyn moved through the space slowly, her eyes taking in everything. The clean floors, the stocked pantry, the water bucket by the door. When she turned back to Silas, her expression was carefully neutral. "Thank you," she said, and disappeared into the bedroom. The first week passed in a kind of awkward silence. Evelyn rose before dawn. Silas heard her moving around in the dark, lighting the stove, starting coffee, and by the time he came inside, she'd already have breakfast ready. They ate without much conversation. Then she'd clean up while he headed out to start the day's work. And by mid-morning, she'd be outside too, doing whatever needed doing. And there was always something that needed doing on a ranch. She worked like someone who'd been working hard jobs her entire life. Not fast exactly, but steady and thorough. She mucked out the horse stalls without being asked, fixed a broken hinge on the chicken coop, reinforced the garden fence. When Silas tried to take a heavy bucket from her, she just looked at him until he let go. "I'm not fragile," she said flatly. "Didn't say you were." "You were thinking it." She was right, though not for the reason she probably assumed. Silas had been thinking she looked exhausted, not fragile. There was a difference, but he didn't know how to explain that without it sounding like criticism or pity, so he said nothing. On the 4th day, Bill showed up with supplies from town and stayed for coffee. Silas could see him trying not to stare at Evelyn, trying not to make the kind of judgments that were obviously forming behind his weathered face. "Mrs. Mercer," Bill said finally, nodding to her. "Miss Vale," Evelyn corrected without looking up from the stove. "We're not married yet." "Oh, right. Sorry, ma'am." Bill left soon after, but Silas knew the damage was done. By evening, everyone in Red Hollow would know that Mercer's mail-order bride was heavy, plain, and standoffish. The story would grow from there. These things always did in small towns where entertainment was scarce. That night, after supper, Silas found Evelyn sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the darkening hills. He hesitated, then sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Bill's not a bad sort," he said. "Talks too much sometimes, but he means well. I don't care what he thinks. People will gossip. It's what they do. Let them." Silas studied her profile in the fading light. There was something hard in the set of her jaw, something that looked like it had been there a long time. He thought about asking where she'd come from, what she was running from, because it was obvious she was running from something, but he'd put "no questions asked" in his advertisement for a reason. People came west to escape things. That was half the point of the frontier. "Storm coming," he said instead, nodding toward the clouds building over the mountains. "Should hit by midnight." Evelyn nodded but didn't respond. They sat in silence as the evening deepened around them, and eventually Silas went inside to leave her to whatever thoughts she was thinking. The storm came like he'd predicted, rolling in with thunder that shook the house and rain that hammered the roof. Silas woke to lightning flashing through the windows and lay there listening to the wind tear at the walls. Solid construction, though. The house would hold. Then he heard something else beneath the storm noise. A sound from the bedroom. Crying. Not loud, not hysterical. Just quiet, broken sobs. The kind someone makes when they think no one can hear them. Silas lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to Evelyn Vale cry herself out while thunder rolled across the valley. And he thought about the look in her eyes when she'd stepped off that stagecoach, the way she constantly scanned for exits, the careful way she moved through space, like someone expecting violence. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't poverty or bad prospects or any of the usual reasons women headed west. It was something worse. 2 weeks after Evelyn's arrival, everything changed. Silas had ridden into town for supplies, leaving Evelyn to handle the ranch. When he reached Milligan's store, there was a stranger standing by the counter, a well-dressed man with expensive boots and a silver watch chain. His horse, tied outside, was a beautiful chestnut gelding worth more than most ranchers made in a year. The stranger looked up when Silas entered, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Help you?" Milligan asked Silas, but his eyes kept flicking nervously toward the stranger. "Need flour, coffee, and lamp oil," Silas said. "Right away." Milligan hurried to gather the items, moving faster than usual. The stranger approached Silas with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often are. Well-fed, well-groomed, his teeth straight and white when he smiled. "Excuse me," he said, his accent cultured, Eastern. "I'm looking for someone. A woman." She would have arrived in the last month or so, traveling alone. Dark hair, heavy-set build. His smile widened slightly. "Rather distinctive, I'm afraid." Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach. He kept his expression neutral. "Lots of people come through Red Hollow," he said. "Mostly don't pay attention." This woman would have stood out. "She's my fiancée, you see. Ran off due to a misunderstanding. Her family's quite worried." The stranger pulled out a photograph. "Perhaps you've seen her." Silas didn't look at the photograph. "Like I said, I don't pay much attention to travelers." The stranger's smile thinned. "I'm offering a substantial reward for information leading to her whereabouts. $200. $200 was a fortune. Half the men in Red Hollow would sell their own mothers for that kind of money." Silas met the stranger's eyes steadily. "Can't help you." He paid for his supplies and left, feeling the stranger's gaze on his back the entire way. Outside, he loaded the supplies quickly and rode out of town faster than necessary, his mind racing. Evelyn was in the garden when he got back, pulling weeds. She looked up at his approach, and whatever she saw in his face made her stand slowly, her hand moving unconsciously to her apron pocket. Where, Silas realized, she probably kept a knife. He dismounted and walked over to her. "There's a man in town," he said quietly. "Well-dressed, Eastern accent, looking for a woman matching your description. Says she's his fiancée." The color drained from Evelyn's face. For a moment she swayed slightly, and Silas thought she might faint. Then her jaw set, and that hard look came back into her eyes. "What did you tell him?" "That I don't pay attention to travelers." "He won't believe that." "Probably not." Evelyn's hand tightened around the weed she was still holding. "I should leave, tonight, before he... No. The word came out sharper than Silas intended. Evelyn stared at him. Mr. Mercer. We had an agreement, Silas said. You came here for safety. That's what you'll have. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Victor Granger doesn't just let things go. He'll destroy you to get to me. Victor Granger? Yes. The name came out bitter. The man everyone tells me I should be grateful to have. The man my own father said was my only chance because no one else would ever want someone who looks like me. Her voice cracked slightly. I thought if I came far enough west, maybe he'd give up. Maybe I could just disappear. But men like him don't give up. They own things, and he thinks he owns me. Silas looked at this tired, frightened woman standing in his garden with dirt under her nails and fear in her eyes. He thought about the way she worked, the way she moved through the house like she was always prepared to run, the sound of her crying during that storm. He thought about the no questions asked part of his advertisement and how that had felt noble when he wrote it. Simple, clean. Turned out reality was messier than advertisements. Tomorrow's Saturday, he said. Town usually gets busy with ranch hands coming in. I'm going to ride back in and make an announcement at the saloon. He paused. I'm going to announce our engagement. Public. Official. What? No, it will make it clear you're under my protection, that you're not available, that anyone looking for you will have to go through me to get there. You'll be killed, Evelyn said flatly. Victor has money. He has men. Maybe. But I gave you my word you'd be safe here. I don't go back on my word. They stared at each other across the garden, the afternoon sun beating down on both of them. Finally, Evelyn's shoulders sagged. Why? She asked quietly. Why would you risk this for me? You don't even know me. It was a fair question. Silas didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, but it felt too raw to say out loud, that he recognized something in her, some fundamental loneliness that matched his own. That the idea of her running again, always running, always afraid, made something in his chest hurt. Because it's right, he said instead. Simple. True enough. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and went back to pulling weeds, but Silas noticed her hands were shaking.
What the warmest so mats.
Saturday morning, Silas rode into Red Hollow alone. The town was busy, like he'd predicted. Ranch hands filled the saloon, spending their wages on whiskey and poker. Merchants did brisk business. The weekend energy that came from people having a few hours to forget about work hummed through the dusty streets. Silas tied his horse outside the Silver Dollar Saloon and pushed through the doors. The place went quiet when he walked in. Not completely silent, but the volume dropped noticeably. Men glanced up from their drinks. The poker game in the corner paused. Red Hollow was small enough that everyone knew Silas Mercer, the solitary rancher who kept to himself and didn't cause trouble, which was why what happened next surprised everyone. Whiskey, Silas told the bartender, a grizzled man named Frank. Frank poured without comment and slid the glass across the bar. Silas drank it in one swallow, then turned to face the room. I've got an announcement, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I'm engaged to Miss Evelyn Vale. We'll be married before the month is out. He paused. Anyone has questions about her, they can direct them to me. The silence that followed was complete. Then Bill, sitting at a table near the back, raised his glass. Congratulations, Silas. A few other men murmured agreement, but most just stared. Silas could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. The gossip, the judgment, the fact that he was publicly claiming a woman they'd already decided wasn't worth claiming. Let them think what they wanted. He paid for his drink and walked out. The stranger, Victor Granger, was standing in the street. Up close, he was even more polished than Silas had initially noticed. His suit was tailored, his hair perfectly combed. He had the kind of face women probably found handsome, all sharp angles and confident smiles. But there was something cold in his eyes, something that reminded Silas of snakes sunning themselves on rocks. Mr. Mercer, isn't it? Victor said pleasantly. Who's asking? Victor Granger. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, a Miss Evelyn Vale. Not an acquaintance, my fiancée. Victor's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his expression. I see. How convenient. You must have worked very quickly to secure such an arrangement. What I do on my ranch is my business. Of course, but you see there's a small problem. Victor stepped closer, still smiling that cold smile. Evelyn is already engaged, to me, has been for 3 years. So your announcement, while touching, is based on false pretenses. She says different. She's confused, emotional. Women often are, particularly women of her temperament. The way he said temperament made it clear he meant something else entirely. I've come to bring her home. Her family is worried sick. She's home. The smile finally cracked. Don't be stupid, Mercer. You're a small-time rancher scratching out a living on 40 acres of nothing. I own half of Tennessee. I have resources you can't imagine and connections that extend all the way to the territorial governor. If I want Evelyn back, I'll have her. The only question is how much this costs you. Silas kept his expression neutral, but his hand moved closer to the gun at his hip. She doesn't want to go with you. What she wants is irrelevant. Not on my land, it isn't. Victor studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You know what I think? I think you saw an opportunity. Homely woman, desperate, probably told you some sob story about her evil fiancé. You thought you could play the hero, maybe get your hands on her inheritance in the process. I don't know anything about an inheritance. Of course you don't. Victor's voice dripped sarcasm. Well, let me educate you. Evelyn's mother left her a substantial piece of property, mineral rights included, worth more than this entire town. And when Evelyn and I marry, that property becomes mine. So you see, Mr. Mercer, this isn't about romance or protection or any noble notion you're entertaining. This is about money, and I will have what's mine. He turned to leave, then paused. I'll give you 3 days to send her back voluntarily. After that, I'll come get her myself, and I promise you, you won't like how that goes. He walked away, his expensive boots kicking up dust in the street. Silas stood there, his heart pounding, his mind racing. An inheritance, mineral rights. No wonder Victor had followed her across half the country. No wonder Evelyn looked so hunted. This wasn't just about a spurned fiancé's pride. This was about money, real money, the kind men killed over. When Silas got back to the ranch, Evelyn was waiting on the porch. She stood when she saw him, her face pale. He was there, wasn't he? Yes. What did he say? Silas dismounted and climbed the porch steps. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, trying to see past the fear and exhaustion to whatever truth was hiding underneath. He mentioned an inheritance, he said quietly. Mineral rights. Property worth more than this whole town. Evelyn's face went carefully blank. I see. That what's in the leather bag you carry everywhere? The deed? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? Her voice was sharp. If I'd written in my letter that I came with valuable property, you would have thought I was trying to trap you, that I was another scheming woman looking for a man to hide behind while I protected my assets. At least this way, I knew you wanted me for work, not money. I don't want your money. Everyone wants money, Mr. Mercer, even people who pretend they don't. She started to turn away, but Silas caught her arm gently. She flinched, and Silas let go immediately, his stomach churning. Did he hurt you? He asked. Victor, did he hurt you? Evelyn's jaw worked. For a moment, Silas thought she wouldn't answer. Then, not in ways that leave scars you can see, the afternoon sun beat down on them. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, even though it wasn't cold. He never hit me, she said finally. Never left bruises. He was too smart for that. But he had other ways of making sure I understood my place. Comments about my weight, about how fortunate I was that he was willing to overlook my appearance, about how no other man would ever want someone built like me. My father agreed with him, said I should be grateful, that I was too old, too plain, too fat to expect anything better. She looked at Silas directly, her dark eyes hard. So yes, he hurt me, every day, in ways that made me wish he would just hit me instead, because at least then I could point to something real and say, this is abuse. But emotional cruelty doesn't leave evidence. It just hollows you out from the inside until you start believing all the terrible things they say about you. Silas felt something fierce and angry building in his chest. You're not any of those things. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you work harder than most men I've hired. I know you're tougher than you give yourself credit for, and I know anyone who made you feel worthless was a damned fool." Evelyn stared at him, something vulnerable flickering across her face before she could stop it. Then she shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you think. Victor's not going to stop. He'll bring men. He'll let him. You don't understand. He has resources, money, connections. I don't care." Silas stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "I made an announcement in town today. Made it clear you're under my protection. That stands. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." "Why?" The word came out almost desperate. "Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know, someone who brought nothing but trouble to your door?" It was the second time she'd asked that question, and Silas still didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, but saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. "Because you deserve better than spending your life running," he said finally. "Because what Victor did to you was wrong, and sometimes someone needs to stand up and say that." He paused. "And because when I look at you, I don't see what he saw. I see someone who survived hell and kept going anyway. That's worth protecting." Evelyn's eyes were bright, like she might cry, but she didn't, just nodded once and turned back toward the house. At the door, she paused. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes?" "Thank you." Then she was gone, leaving Silas alone on the porch with the setting sun and the growing certainty that he'd just declared war on a man with the resources to destroy him. But for the first time in years, Silas felt like he was doing something that mattered, even if it killed him. Mos. The next 2 days passed in tense silence. Evelyn moved through the ranch work with mechanical efficiency, but Silas could see the fear building behind her eyes. She startled at unexpected sounds, scanned the horizon constantly, kept a knife in her apron pocket at all times. Silas checked his weapons, cleaned his rifle, made sure he had enough ammunition. Then he rode out to the neighboring ranches, visiting the men he'd worked with over the years. Old Sam Tucker, who ran cattle on the adjacent property, listened to Silas's story and nodded slowly. "Granger, huh? Heard of him? Rich bastard. Connected." Sam spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "You're asking for trouble." "I know." "Could get yourself killed." "I know that too." Sam studied him for a long moment. Then he reached for his rifle. "Well, hell, can't let you face it alone. We'll watch your property line. Anyone comes through without permission, we'll give you warning." Similar conversations happened at 2 other ranches. By the end of the day, Silas had 6 men who'd agreed to help watch for trouble. Not an army, but better than nothing. When he told Evelyn that night, she just shook her head. "They'll get hurt because of me." They're grown men making their own choices. Choices based on loyalty to you, not knowledge of what they're facing. "Maybe, but that's not your decision to make for them." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then, "The deed. The property my mother left me. It's in Tennessee near Copper Ridge. Mineral surveys suggest silver, maybe copper. That's why Victor wants it so badly. He's already in debt from bad investments. This property could save him. Or he could just want you." Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Men like Victor don't want women like me. They want what we can give them. Money, status, control. I was convenient, controllable, until I wasn't." "You took the deed and ran." 3 months ago, middle of the night. My father was drunk, Victor was in town on business. I took the deed from my father's safe, packed 1 bag, and left. Been moving west ever since." She looked at Silas. "I thought I'd covered my tracks well enough. But Victor has money and patience. He hired trackers. It was only a matter of time before he found me." "What do you want to do?" The question seemed to surprise her. "What do you mean? With the property, the deed, what do you want?" Evelyn was quiet for so long, Silas thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I want to burn it. The deed, the property, all of it. I want to destroy the thing that's made my life hell for the past 3 years. Her voice was low, vicious. "But I can't, because it was my mother's, the only thing she ever had that was truly hers. And she left it to me, trusting I'd do something better with it than my father did with his life. So we protect it, and you. It's not that simple." "Seems pretty simple to me." Evelyn looked at him with something like despair. "You're going to get hurt, Mr. Mercer, or worse, and it's going to be my fault. Then I guess you'd better make it worth it. He meant it as encouragement, maybe even a joke, but Evelyn didn't smile, just nodded and went inside, leaving Silas alone with the stars and the growing certainty that whatever came next would be violent and probably fatal. But he'd meant what he'd said in town. Some things were worth fighting for, even if you barely knew them. Victor came on the third day, just like he'd promised. Silas saw the riders approaching from the eastern ridge around mid-afternoon. 6 men on horseback, moving slow and deliberate. Victor rode in front, his expensive suit replaced with travel clothes that probably cost more than Silas's entire wardrobe. Inside the house, Evelyn had gone very still. "How many?" she asked quietly. 6, including Victor. "Armed?" "Yes." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. That hard look was back, the one that said she'd survived worse and would survive this too, even if it killed her. "There's a root cellar," Silas said, "under the kitchen floor, hidden. You could—" "No." "Evelyn?" "No." She looked at him directly. "I'm done hiding. Whatever happens, I'm standing my ground, just like you." Silas wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it would be useless, so he just nodded and picked up his rifle. They waited on the porch. Victor and his men stopped about 50 yards from the house, just outside easy rifle range. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Victor dismounted and walked forward alone, his hands visibly empty of weapons. "Mr. Mercer," he called out, "I believe we have unfinished business. Believe we finished it 3 days ago." "You're making a mistake, a dangerous one." Victor's voice was reasonable, almost friendly. "I'm prepared to be generous. Leave now. Forget this entire situation, and I'll pay you $2,000 for your trouble. That's more money than you'll see in 5 years of ranching." "Not interested." "Don't be a fool. You can't win this. I have 6 men. You have a rifle and a woman who's too fat to run very fast when things go wrong." Behind Silas, Evelyn made a small sound. Not hurt exactly, but something close to it. Silas's grip tightened on the rifle. "That's your last warning," Victor continued. "Send her out now, or we come in and get her. Your choice." Silas cocked the rifle. The sound was very loud in the afternoon stillness. "You take 1 step closer to my house," he said clearly, "and I put a bullet through your chest. That's my only warning." Victor's face hardened. "So be it." He turned and walked back to his men. They conferred briefly. Then 2 of the riders split off, circling toward the back of the house. The other 4 dismounted and spread out, taking positions behind rocks and trees. "They're going to surround us," Evelyn said quietly. "I know. We can't hold them off from all sides." "I know that too." Evelyn looked at him, her dark eyes serious. "Mr. Mercer, Silas, thank you for trying." Before Silas could respond, the first shot rang out. It came from one of Victor's men, aimed high, a warning shot that splintered wood near the porch roof. Silas fired back, not aiming to kill, but to establish that he wasn't bluffing. His shot kicked up dirt 2 feet from where one of the men was crouching. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Windows shattered. Bullets thudded into the house walls. Silas dragged Evelyn down behind the porch railing, returning fire when he could. The air filled with gun smoke and the sharp crack of rifles. They were outnumbered and outflanked, and everyone involved knew it. Then, from the ridge to the north, more shots rang out. Silas risked a glance and saw old Sam Tucker and 3 other ranchers taking positions on the high ground, firing down at Victor's men. The reinforcements he'd asked for, arriving just when they were needed most. The battle that followed was brief and brutal. Victor's men, caught between 2 positions, tried to press their advantage, but the ranchers had better position. One of Victor's men took a bullet through the shoulder. Another's horse panicked and threw him. The tactical situation shifted rapidly. Victor, seeing his men falling back, made a desperate decision. He ran toward the house alone, pistol drawn, screaming Evelyn's name. Silas stepped in front of the door, rifle raised, but Victor was too close, too fast. They collided hard, and the rifle went flying. Then they were fighting hand to hand on the porch, punching, grappling, rolling across the wooden planks. Victor was younger, better fed, but Silas had spent years doing hard physical labor that built the kind of strength you couldn't buy in a gymnasium. They were evenly matched, trading blows that rattled teeth and split skin. Then Victor got his hand on his pistol. He raised it toward Silas's head, his face twisted with rage, and Evelyn hit him from behind with a cast-iron skillet. The impact made a sound like a bell ringing. Victor dropped like a stone, the pistol falling from his limp fingers. Evelyn stood over him, the skillet still raised, her chest heaving, her face flushed. "Nobody," she said clearly, "calls me fat and lives." Then she dropped the skillet and sat down hard on the porch steps, shaking. The aftermath was messy. Victor's men, seeing their boss unconscious and bleeding from the head, decided discretion was the better part of valor and retreated. Old Sam and the other ranchers came down from the ridge, weapons ready, but the fight was over. Victor regained consciousness about 20 minutes later, groggy and confused. His eyes focused on Evelyn, and something ugly crossed his face. "You bitch," he slurred. "You'll pay for this. I'll have you arrested. You'll leave," Silas said flatly. "You'll get on your horse, ride out of this territory, and never come back. Because if you don't, every man here will testify that you and your hired guns attacked a private residence without provocation. That's attempted murder. The territorial marshal takes a dim view of that kind of thing. She has my property. She has her property, left to her by her mother, legal and documented. You don't have any claim to it, and you never did." Victor looked around at the circle of armed ranchers, at Evelyn standing with a rifle in her hands now, at Silas with blood running down his face from a split lip. He was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said quietly. "It is." She pulled out a folded paper from her apron. The deed, Silas realized. She held it up so Victor could see it clearly. "This is what you wanted. What you tried to take from me by breaking me down, making me believe I was worthless, that I should be grateful for your attention." Her voice was steady, cold. "But I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done believing the lies you told me about myself. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to go back to Tennessee and tell everyone I died on the journey west. You're going to forget I ever existed. And if I don't, then I'm going to file a report with the territorial marshal detailing everything. The coercion, the emotional abuse, the attempted kidnapping. I have witnesses now." She gestured to the ranchers. "Men who will testify to what happened here today. And I have this deed which proves my ownership of property you claimed was yours. How do you think that will look to your business partners? Your creditors?" Victor's face went white, then red, then white again. "Get him on his horse," Silas told Sam. They hauled Victor up, none too gently, and threw him onto his mount. He sat there, swaying slightly, his hand pressed to the back of his head where Evelyn had hit him. "I loved you," he said, looking down at Evelyn. "I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing but pain," Evelyn said, "and you never loved me. You loved what I represented, control, money, power, but I was never actually a person to you, just a thing to be owned." Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his remaining men trailing behind him like whipped dogs. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then Evelyn sat down on the porch steps and started crying. Not the quiet, hidden tears Silas had heard that first night during the storm. These were loud, gulping sobs, the kind that come from somewhere deep and primal, from a place where all the fear and shame and exhaustion finally have permission to escape. Silas sat down beside her, not quite touching, just present. The other ranchers made their excuses and left, understanding that some moments needed privacy. After a while, Evelyn's crying subsided into hiccups, then silence. She wiped her face with her apron, leaving streaks of dirt across her cheeks. "I hit him with a skillet," she said wonderingly. "You did. I could have killed him. But you didn't." She looked at Silas, her eyes red and swollen. "Thank you for standing up for me, for not making me face him alone. You would have faced him anyway, with or without me. Maybe, but it was better with you." They sat there as the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and red. The ranch house was shot full of holes, the fence was damaged, and there would be repairs that took weeks. But they were alive, and Evelyn was free. "What now?" she asked finally. "Now we fix what's broken. Board up the windows, patch the walls, get back to work. Silas paused. And maybe, if you're willing, we could make that engagement announcement real. Get properly married. Not because of some arrangement or agreement, but because he trailed off, not quite sure how to finish. Because? Evelyn prompted softly. Because these past few weeks, having you here, working beside you, watching you survive hell and keep going anyway. It made me realize how empty this place was before. How empty I was. He looked at her directly. I'm not good with words, and I can't promise you anything fancy or easy, but I can promise you'll never face anything alone again, that you'll always have a place here for exactly who you are. No judgments, no shame, just home. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him. I think, she said slowly, I would like that. Very much. They sat there holding hands as darkness fell over Red Hollow, two damaged people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Not romance exactly, not yet, but something better. Partnership, respect, safety, and maybe, eventually, love. But that was a story for another day. Tonight, they had survived, and that was enough. The wedding happened 3 weeks later in the front room of the ranch house, with old Sam Tucker standing as witness and a traveling circuit judge who happened to be passing through Red Hollow performing the ceremony. It wasn't fancy. Evelyn wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Silas had bought in town. Silas wore his cleanest shirt and pants that didn't have holes in them. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes. When the judge pronounced them married, Silas hesitated, then leaned in and kissed Evelyn's cheek. She went very still, like she wasn't sure what to do with the gesture, then gave a small nod that might have been acknowledgement or permission or simple confusion. Well, Sam said afterward, raising a glass of whiskey, here's to not getting shot before the vows. It was the closest thing to a joke anyone had made in weeks, and it fell flat. The attack had left everyone jumpy. Evelyn still scanned the horizon constantly. Silas slept with his rifle within arm's reach. The boarded-up windows and patched bullet holes served as constant reminders that violence could return at any moment. But Victor didn't come back. Days turned into weeks. The ranch slowly returned to its normal rhythm: morning chores, afternoon work, evening meals eaten in companionable silence. Evelyn moved into the bedroom properly now, and Silas took the small cot he'd set up in the main room. Neither of them suggested changing that arrangement, and neither of them discussed why. The thing was, marriage on paper didn't automatically create intimacy. They were still essentially strangers who happened to share a house and a last name. Silas didn't know Evelyn's favorite color, or what she dreamed about, or what made her laugh. Evelyn didn't know much about Silas beyond the fact that he kept his word and worked hard, and could apparently take a beating without staying down. They existed in a strange limbo, married but not, together but separate, connected by survival more than affection. It bothered Silas more than he wanted to admit. One evening, about a month after the wedding, he came in from fixing fence posts to find Evelyn standing at the stove, stirring something that smelled like beef stew. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked tired but solid, real in a way that made Silas's chest tight. "Evelyn," he said, and she turned. "Supper's almost ready." "That's not... I wanted to ask you something." She set down the spoon, her expression careful. "All right. Are you happy here?" The question clearly surprised her. "I'm alive. I'm safe. That's more than I had before." "That's not what I asked." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then moved to sit at the table. Silas joined her, keeping space between them like they always did. "I don't know if I remember how to be happy," she said finally. "The last few years I was just trying to survive. Before that, I was trying to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough that maybe people would stop looking at me like I was something broken. Happiness wasn't really part of the equation. And now? Now I'm still trying to figure out what normal looks like. But yes, I think I could be happy here. Eventually, if that's allowed." "Why wouldn't it be allowed?" Evelyn looked at him directly. "Because this was supposed to be a practical arrangement, a business transaction. You didn't sign up for a wife who brings armed men to your door and cries during thunderstorms and doesn't know how to be the kind of woman men actually want. You're the kind of woman I want. The words came out before Silas could stop them, raw and honest. Evelyn stared at him. You don't mean that. I do. Silas, you barely know me. I know enough. He leaned forward slightly. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're brave enough to run halfway across the country alone. I know you stood up to a man who spent years trying to break you, and you won. That's the kind of woman I want. Not some delicate thing who needs protecting. Someone strong. Someone real. Evelyn's eyes were bright again, that shine that meant tears were close. You don't know what you're saying. I'm saying I'd like this marriage to be real. Not just on paper, if you're willing. I don't know how to be a real wife. And I don't know how to be a real husband. Maybe we figure it out together. They sat there in the lamplight, the stew simmering on the stove, the evening settling around them. Finally, Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand, the same gesture from that night on the porch, but this time it felt different, more intentional. I'd like that, she said quietly. But you need to understand something. I'm not going to suddenly become someone different. I'm not going to lose weight or become graceful or turn into the kind of woman who looks good in fancy dresses. This is what you get. And if that's not enough, it's enough, Silas said firmly. You're enough. Evelyn nodded slowly, like she was trying to believe him but couldn't quite get there yet. Then we can try, but slowly. I need slowly. Slowly works. That night, Evelyn moved some of her things into the bedroom where Silas had been sleeping on the cot, and they awkwardly negotiated sharing the space like two people who'd never lived with anyone before. It was clumsy and strange, and neither of them slept well, but it was a start, and sometimes starts are all you need. The trouble began again 6 weeks later. Silas was in town buying supplies when Bill pulled him aside with a worried expression. You hear about the surveyors? Bill asked quietly. What surveyors? Showed up 3 days ago. Expensive gear, official documents, claiming they're doing mineral surveys for some company out of Denver. But the thing is, Silas, they're surveying the land around your property, getting real close to your boundary lines. Something cold settled in Silas's stomach. Who hired them? Wouldn't say. But I heard one of them mention Tennessee to Frank at the saloon. Could be coincidence, but it probably wasn't. Silas paid for his supplies and rode back to the ranch faster than necessary, his mind racing. When he got there, Evelyn was in the garden, and one look at his face made her drop the basket she was holding. What happened? He told her about the surveyors, watched the color drain from her face. He's trying to find the property, she said, the land my mother left me. If he can locate it, establish that it's valuable, he can use that information to challenge my ownership. Claim I misrepresented the deed or stole it, or that my mother wasn't of sound mind when she left it to me. He has lawyers. He has money. If he builds a good enough case, can he do that? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Evelyn's hands were shaking. I thought if I left, if I got far enough away, he'd eventually give up and find some other woman to torment. But he's not going to stop. This is about money now, not me. He'll keep coming, keep pushing, until he gets what he wants or someone stops him permanently. So we stop him permanently. How? We can't kill him. We're not murderers. Silas didn't have an answer for that. They stood there in the garden with afternoon sun beating down and the smell of growing things around them. And for the first time since the fight, Silas felt truly helpless. You couldn't shoot at lawyers, couldn't threaten surveyors who were just doing their jobs. Victor had shifted tactics, moving from violence to legal maneuvering, and Silas didn't know how to fight that kind of battle. That night, Evelyn pulled out the leather bag she'd carried from Tennessee. Inside was the deed, yellowed paper with careful handwriting and an official seal. She spread it on the table while Silas lit more lamps. Copper Ridge, she said, pointing to the location. About 40 miles east of Knoxville. 300 acres. My mother inherited it from her father, who bought it for almost nothing because everyone thought the land was worthless. Too rocky, too steep, no good for farming. But grandfather always insisted there was something valuable underneath. Spent years doing his own amateur surveys before he died. And he was right? Maybe. Probably. My mother had a professional surveyor look at it about 5 years before she died. He found signs of mineral deposits, copper, possibly silver, enough to be worth serious money if someone invested in proper mining operations. That's when my father started paying attention. Suddenly, the worthless land his wife owned became very interesting. Why didn't he just take it? Tennessee law. My grandfather wrote the deed specifically to my grandmother, then to my mother, then to me. As long as the women in the family maintained ownership, my father couldn't touch it. He was furious, spent years trying to convince my mother to sign it over to him. She refused. When she died, it passed to me, and he tried a different approach. Victor, Evelyn's voice was bitter. My father found a man with ambition and debt in equal measure. Promised him that if he married me, he'd have access to the land. Victor agreed because he needed money and probably thought managing one fat, ugly woman would be easy enough. The plan was simple. Marry me, take control of the property, develop it, split the profits with my father. But you ran. I ran. She looked at the deed, her expression complicated. My mother told me before she died that this land was my freedom, that as long as I owned it, I had options, power, a way out if I needed it. She made me promise never to give it up, never to let father or anyone else take it from me. So when Victor started talking about marriage and I realized what they were planning, I stole the deed and left. Silas studied the document, legal language he didn't fully understand, descriptions of boundaries and mineral rights, signatures and seals. A piece of paper that represented enough money to change lives, to ruin them. We need to make sure this is secure, he said. Not just hidden, but legally protected. If Victor challenges your ownership, we need documentation, witnesses, proof that it's legitimately yours. How do we do that? I don't know, but I know someone who might. The next morning, Silas rode to Red Hollow and found Judge Harrison at the boarding house where he stayed during his circuit through the territory. Harrison was an older man, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for fairness and a deep dislike of legal shenanigans. Silas explained the situation, carefully, leaving out some of the more violent details, but making clear that Evelyn's ownership was being challenged by a man with resources and bad intentions. Harrison listened, his expression thoughtful. When Silas finished, the judge leaned back in his chair. The problem you're facing, Mr. Mercer, is that territorial law is still fairly new and somewhat flexible. If this Victor Granger has good lawyers and enough money, he can tie this up in courts for years. Even if your wife ultimately wins, the legal fees alone could bankrupt you. So what do? You need to establish clear, undeniable ownership before he files any official challenges. Get the deed registered with the Territorial Land Office in Denver. Have multiple witnesses attest to your wife's identity and her mother's wishes. Build a paper trail so solid that any challenge would be obviously frivolous. Harrison paused. And you need to do it fast, before Granger's lawyers start filing paperwork. How fast? Days, not weeks. If I were you, I'd be on a train to Denver by tomorrow morning. Silas rode back to the ranch and told Evelyn what Harrison had said. She listened with growing alarm. Denver's 3 days away by train. We'd need to leave immediately, and even then we leave immediately. Silas, we can't just abandon the ranch. The animals, the property. Sam can watch things. We've helped him before. He'll return the favor. And if Victor comes while we're gone, then Sam and the others will handle it. Silas took her hands, making sure she was looking at him. Listen to me. The ranch doesn't matter if we lose everything fighting legal battles. Your mother left you this land for a reason. We protect it, whatever that takes. Evelyn looked scared but determined. All right, we go to Denver. They packed quickly. Just essentials. The deed secured in Evelyn's leather bag. Enough money for train fare and a few nights in a hotel. Silas rode over to Sam's place and explained the situation. Sam agreed to watch the ranch without hesitation, though his expression was worried. You're stirring up a hornet's nest, Silas? I know. Could get real ugly. Already is ugly. We're just trying to make it legal ugly instead of violent ugly. Sam snorted. Not sure that's an improvement, but I'll keep an eye on things. You two be careful in Denver. City's not like here. Different rules. They caught the morning train from Red Hollow, a cramped passenger car that smelled like coal smoke and unwashed bodies. Evelyn sat by the window, her bag clutched in her lap, watching the landscape roll past with nervous energy. Silas had never been to Denver, never been on a train for this long. The constant motion was disorienting, and the other passengers kept staring at them, or more specifically, at Evelyn, with the kind of curiosity that bordered on rudeness. A woman traveling with her husband shouldn't have attracted attention, but somehow Evelyn always did. Her size, her intensity, something indefinable that made people look twice and whisper behind their hands. "Ignore them," Silas said quietly. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be." Evelyn smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to my whole life." They reached Denver on the third day, exhausted and sore from sleeping sitting up. The city was overwhelming. More people in one place than Silas had ever seen, buildings taller than seemed safe, noise and chaos, and the constant smell of industry and humanity pressed too close together. Evelyn looked terrified. "Stay close," Silas said, taking her arm. Not possessively, but protectively. The crowd around the train station was thick with people who looked like they'd cut your throat for the change in your pocket. They found a small hotel near the land office, nothing fancy but clean enough, and paid for a room. The clerk gave them a look when Evelyn signed the register, something dismissive and slightly contemptuous that made Silas's jaw tighten. "Something wrong?" he asked the clerk flatly. "No, sir. Enjoy your stay." In the room, Evelyn sat on the bed and took a shaky breath. "I hate cities. Makes two of us." Everyone stares, like I'm some kind of curiosity, like they can't believe someone like me exists outside their worst assumptions. Silas sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space. "Their problem, not yours." "Easy to say." "True anyway." They sat in silence for a while. Then Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out the deed, unfolding it carefully on the bed between them. "Tomorrow we make this official," she said. "Make it so Victor can't touch it, can't touch me." "Tomorrow," Silas agreed. That night they shared a bed properly for the first time. Not intimately. Both of them were too exhausted and stressed for that, but sleeping side by side, close enough to hear each other breathe. At some point during the night, Evelyn turned toward Silas in her sleep, and he felt her hand find his under the blanket. He held on and didn't let go. The Territorial Land Office was an imposing stone building that smelled like old paper and bureaucracy. A clerk with spectacles and an officious manner directed them to a desk where a thin man with ink-stained fingers reviewed documents. "Purpose of registration?" the clerk asked without looking up. "Establishing clear ownership of inherited property," Silas said. "Location of property?" "Copper Ridge, Tennessee." That got the clerk's attention. He looked up, his expression suddenly more interested. "Tennessee property being registered in Colorado territory. That's unusual." "Owner's relocating," Silas explained. "Wants to ensure documentation is filed in multiple jurisdictions." The clerk's eyes moved to Evelyn, assessing. "You're the property owner?" "Yes," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, but Silas could see her hands trembling slightly. "I'll need to see the original deed, proof of identity, and testimony regarding the chain of ownership. Do you have witnesses?" "We have the deed. What kind of proof of identity do you need?" "Preferably documents from Tennessee. Birth certificate, marriage license, anything establishing your legal name and your mother's legal name. Without that, registration becomes much more complicated." Evelyn's face fell. "I didn't bring those. I left in a hurry." The clerk's expression shifted toward suspicious. "I see. That's problematic. Without proper documentation, I can't verify that you are who you claim to be, which means I can't verify the legitimacy of the ownership transfer. It would be irresponsible to register property based solely on verbal claims." "She has the original deed," Silas said, trying to keep his voice level. "That should count for something. Possession of a deed doesn't prove ownership. Anyone could steal a deed and claim it's theirs. I need documentation." The clerk pushed his spectacles up his nose. "If you'd like to file a preliminary claim, you can do that, but full registration will require proper paperwork from Tennessee. That could take months." "We don't have months," Evelyn said, her voice rising slightly. "There's a man trying to Silas put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Getting emotional wouldn't help. He thought fast. What if we had witnesses from Tennessee? People who could testify to Mrs. Mercer's identity and her mother's wishes. That would help, certainly, but they'd need to be credible witnesses with documentation of their own. And they'd need to be here in person, which was impossible. Everyone in Tennessee who knew Evelyn either wanted her back or was loyal to her father. There was no one to call on. They left the land office in defeat. Outside, Evelyn slumped against the building wall, her face pale. "It's not going to work. Victor's going to win because I can't prove who I am without going back to Tennessee. And if I go back, he'll... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Silas felt helpless fury building in his chest. They'd come all this way, spent money they couldn't afford, put themselves at risk, and it wasn't enough. The system designed to protect property rights was too tangled in bureaucracy to actually help someone who needed protection. There has to be another way, he said. What way? I left everything behind. Birth certificate, baptism records, letters from my mother. Everything that could prove my identity is back in my father's house, and he'd burn it all before he'd let me use it to keep the land. Silas turned the problem over in his mind. There had to be something, some angle they hadn't considered. Then an idea struck him. Judge Harrison, he said. What? Judge Harrison married us. He's a territorial official. His word carries weight. If he testified that he witnessed our marriage, verified your identity as Evelyn Vale before the ceremony, that might be enough to establish a paper trail. Evelyn looked at him with desperate hope. You think that would work? I don't know, but it's something. Harrison's back in Red Hollow by now, but we could send a telegram, get him to prepare an affidavit. It's not perfect, but combined with the deed itself, it might be enough for a preliminary registration, which would at least establish my claim before Victor can file his challenge. Exactly. They found a telegraph office and sent a carefully worded message to Judge Harrison, explaining the situation and requesting his assistance. Then they waited. Waiting in Denver was expensive and nerve-wracking. They couldn't afford to stay in the hotel indefinitely, but they couldn't leave without securing the registration. Each day cost money they didn't have. Each night, Silas watched their funds dwindle and calculated how long they could hold out before they'd have to choose between eating and paying for lodging. Evelyn grew quieter as the days passed, more withdrawn. She'd sit by the hotel window staring out at the city, and Silas could see the weight of everything pressing down on her. The fear that they'd come all this way for nothing, that Victor would win simply because the system was designed to favor men with money and connections over women trying to protect themselves. On the fourth day, Silas came back to the hotel room to find Evelyn crying silently by the window. Not the loud, cleansing tears from after the fight. These were the hopeless kind, the ones that meant someone was giving up. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her. Talk to me. I'm tired, Silas. I'm so tired of fighting, of running, of being told I'm not enough, don't have enough, can't prove enough. Maybe Victor should just win. Maybe it would be easier to just... She trailed off. Don't, Silas said firmly. Don't give up now. Not after everything you've survived. Why not? What's the point? He has lawyers, money, connections. We have a deed and hope. That's not a fair fight. Since when are you interested in fair? Fair would have been staying in Tennessee and marrying the man your father chose. You didn't want fair. You wanted freedom. Evelyn looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. What if I can't have it? What if freedom isn't actually possible for someone like me? Someone like you? Poor, female, fat, undesirable, take your pick. Silas felt anger flare, sharp and hot, not at Evelyn, but at every person who'd put those words in her head, who'd convinced her that her worth was measured by things that didn't matter. You want to know what I see when I look at you, he said. I see the strongest person I've ever met. Someone who crossed half a continent alone, who stood up to armed men, who refuses to be broken even when everything's trying to break her. That's not undesirable. That's incredible. You're just saying that... I'm saying it because it's true, and I'm done watching you believe the lies that bastards told you about yourself. He took her hands, making her look at him. We're going to win this. Maybe not today, maybe not the way we planned, but we're going to win. Because giving up isn't who you are. You don't know how to give up. That's why you're still here. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, something shifted in her expression. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Determination, maybe. Or just stubbornness. All right, she said quietly. We keep fighting. The telegram from Judge Harrison arrived the next morning. It was brief but effective. Official affidavit prepared, being sent via courier, should arrive within 3 days, happy to testify in person if needed. 3 more days of waiting. 3 more days of dwindling funds and growing anxiety. But at least it was movement. Progress. On the second day of waiting, Silas was at the hotel's small dining room getting breakfast when a man at the next table leaned over. Excuse me, the man said. Couldn't help overhearing earlier. You're dealing with a property dispute in Tennessee? Silas tensed immediately. Who's asking? Name's Robert Chen. I'm a lawyer here in Denver. Specialize in property law, particularly cases involving inheritance and out-of-state claims. He pulled out a card. If you're having trouble with registration, I might be able to help. We can't afford a lawyer. I'm not asking for money, at least not up front. Chen's expression was serious. I've handled several cases involving women trying to protect inherited property from male relatives or fiancés attempting to claim ownership. It's a pattern I find deeply troubling. If your wife's situation is similar, I'd be interested in helping pro bono, at least until we see what kind of case we can build. Silas studied the man. Chen looked to be in his 30s, well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so, with intelligent eyes and a manner that seemed genuine rather than opportunistic. Why would you do that? Silas asked. Because the law should protect people, not just property. And because I'm tired of watching women lose everything, because the system assumes they're less capable of ownership than men. Chen leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your wife's situation. If I can help, I will. Silas made a decision. He told Chen everything. Evelyn's escape, Victor's pursuit, the deed, the problems with registration. Chen listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. When Silas finished, Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your wife needs more than registration. She needs legal protection. An injunction preventing anyone from challenging her ownership without substantial proof. Documentation establishing her rights so thoroughly that any attempt to contest them would be obviously frivolous. That's complicated, but it's possible, especially if we move fast. How fast? Judge Harrison's affidavit will help establish preliminary registration, but we should also file for formal recognition of your wife's ownership in Tennessee courts. Simultaneously, create a legal record in both territories that's strong enough to withstand challenge. It won't be cheap, and it'll take time, but it's the best way to protect her long term. I told you we can't afford. I'll work on contingency. If we win and the property proves valuable, I take a small percentage of any future profits. If we lose or the property turns out to be worthless, you owe me nothing. That's the deal. It was too good to be true. Had to be. But Silas looked at Chen's face and saw something genuine there. Maybe not altruism exactly, but honest belief that what he was doing mattered. I need to talk to my wife, Silas said. Of course. Here's my office address. Come by tomorrow if you're interested. Silas took the card and went back upstairs. Evelyn listened to his explanation with growing amazement. A lawyer wants to help us? For free? Not exactly free. Contingency. He gets a cut if the property makes money. That seems too convenient. What if he's working for Victor? What if this is a trap to get the deed? It was a fair concern. Silas had thought the same thing. Harrison's affidavit will be here in 2 days. We could wait for that, try to handle registration ourselves, or we could take a chance on Chen and maybe get ahead of this thing instead of constantly reacting to Victor's moves. Evelyn paced the small room, thinking. Finally, she said, My mother told me to trust my instincts, that knowing when to take risks was part of staying free. She looked at Silas. What do your instincts say, That Chen's genuine, that we need help, that trying to do this alone isn't working. Then we talk to him, but carefully. And the deed stays with me at all times. They met with Robert Chen the next morning at his office, a modest space filled with law books and filing cabinets. Chen listened as Evelyn explained her situation in more detail, asking occasional questions, but mostly just absorbing information. When she finished, he pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what we're going to do, he said. First, we register the property here with Harrison's affidavit as supporting documentation. That establishes your claim in Colorado territory. Simultaneously, I'm going to file paperwork in Tennessee, requests for official copies of your birth certificate, your mother's death certificate, the original property transfer from your grandfather. We do this through official channels, which means your father can't interfere without committing a crime. It'll take weeks, maybe months. But once we have those documents, your ownership becomes virtually unassailable. And in the meantime? Evelyn asked. In the meantime, we file for a temporary injunction preventing anyone from developing, selling, or otherwise interfering with the Copper Ridge property until ownership is definitively established. That freezes everything. Victor can't move forward with his plans, and you maintain status quo. Will a Tennessee court grant an injunction based on our filing? Maybe, maybe not. But the attempt creates a legal record. It establishes that you're actively defending your rights. That matters in court. Chen looked at both of them seriously. I won't lie to you. This is going to be a fight. Victor Granger sounds like a man with resources and determination. But you have something he doesn't, legitimate ownership and the law on your side. We just need to make the law work the way it's supposed to. Over the next 3 days, Chen worked with a speed and efficiency that left Silas impressed. Harrison's affidavit arrived and was immediately filed with the land office along with a formal registration request. Chen drafted injunction paperwork and sent it via telegraph to colleagues in Tennessee. He compiled a detailed legal argument establishing Evelyn's ownership based on inheritance law and property rights. It was exhausting and expensive. Even pro bono work had costs for filing fees and telegraph charges. But slowly, a foundation was being built, a legal framework that would protect Evelyn. On their last day in Denver before heading back to Red Hollow, Chen called them to his office one final time. Registration is approved, he said. Preliminary, pending full documentation, but approved. The Copper Ridge property is now officially registered in Evelyn Mercer's name in Colorado Territorial Records. That's a significant victory. Evelyn sagged with relief. So it's over? Not over, but better, much better. You have legal standing now. If Victor wants to challenge your ownership, he'll need to file formal paperwork, provide evidence, go through proper channels. He can't just show up with armed men or lawyers making threats. The law will take time to work through completely, but you're protected. Chen smiled. You should be proud. You did something difficult, and you won. On the train back to Red Hollow, Evelyn sat by the window again. But this time her expression was different, less haunted, more solid. Thank you, she said to Silas. For what? For believing this was worth fighting for believing I was worth fighting for. Silas took her hand. Always. They arrived back at the ranch to find everything intact. Sam had kept things running smoothly, and there had been no sign of Victor or his men. The boarded windows had been properly repaired, the bullet holes patched. It looked almost normal. That night, sitting on the porch with the familiar landscape stretching out before them, Evelyn leaned against Silas's shoulder. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact beyond hand-holding, and Silas went very still, not wanting to spook her. I think I might actually be happy, she said quietly. Is that allowed? It's required, Silas said, and felt her laugh softly against him. Above them, stars wheeled through the vast frontier sky, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt like something other than a threat. It felt like possibility. The peace lasted exactly 6 weeks. Silas should have known better than to think Victor Granger was the type to accept defeat gracefully. Men like him didn't lose. They just changed tactics and came back harder. But those 6 weeks had been good enough that Silas had let himself believe maybe, just maybe, they were done running. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Bill rode up to the ranch at a speed that said bad news was coming with him. Silas, Bill called out, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. You need to hear this. Silas set down the post he'd been setting and walked over, his stomach already tightening with dread. Evelyn appeared from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. What's wrong? She asked. There's been talk in town. A group of men showed up yesterday asking questions about your property. Not surveyors this time. These were different. Professional types. They were showing papers around, official-looking documents with seals and everything, claiming they represent something called the Granger Mining Consortium. Evelyn's face went white. Mining Consortium? That's what they said. They're claiming legal right to develop the Copper Ridge property. Got papers saying they have mineral rights, signed over by the legitimate owner. Bill looked at Evelyn apologetically. They're saying you ain't the legitimate owner, that the property was fraudulently obtained. That's impossible, Silas said. We registered everything in Denver. The deed's legal. I'm just telling you what they're saying. They've got lawyers, Silas, real ones. Not territorial circuit judges or small-time clerks, big city lawyers from back east. And they're setting up in Red Hollow like they plan to stay a while. Evelyn swayed slightly, and Silas caught her elbow to steady her. Her skin was cold despite the morning heat. He's not trying to take the land anymore, she said quietly. He's just taking it, acting like he already owns it. Can he do that? Silas asked Bill. Don't know, but having lawyers wave papers around makes people nervous. Some folks in town are already talking like maybe the consortium has a point, like maybe Evelyn really did steal the deed or forge the ownership or something. I didn't steal anything. It was my mother's. I know that, Bill said quickly, but these lawyers are good talkers. They're making it sound like you're some kind of criminal, and Victor's just trying to protect his legitimate business interests. They even have testimony from your father, signed and notarized, saying you took the deed without permission. Evelyn made a sound like she'd been punched. My father testified against me? According to what they're showing around, yeah. Silas felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. He'd known Evelyn's father was a bastard, but this was something else. This was betrayal so complete it almost defied comprehension. We need to contact Chen, Silas said. The lawyer in Denver. He'll know what to do. Already sent him a telegram this morning, Bill said. Figured you'd want him informed. But Silas, these consortium people, they're not just talking. They're acting like the matter's already settled, like they've won and it's just a matter of time before everyone else realizes it. After Bill left, Evelyn sat on the porch steps and stared at nothing. Silas sat beside her, not touching, just present. My father hates me, she said finally. Her voice was flat, empty. I knew that, but I didn't think he'd actually help Victor destroy me. I thought maybe there was some limit to how far he'd go. But there isn't. He'd rather see me lose everything than admit I had a right to leave. We're not going to lose. You don't know that. No, but I know we're not giving up. Chen helped us before. He'll help us now. Evelyn looked at him with something like pity. Silas, Victor has unlimited resources. Every time we fight back, he just comes at us from a different angle. Legal challenges, armed men, surveyors, and now this, a fake mining company acting like they already own property that's mine. How long can we keep fighting before we run out of money, or energy, or both? It was a fair question. One Silas didn't have a good answer for. Their savings were nearly depleted from the Denver trip. The ranch work had suffered from all the distractions. Winter was coming, and they weren't as prepared as they should be. Fighting a legal battle while trying to survive was slowly grinding them down. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. As long as it takes, Silas said simply. The response from Chen came 2 days later via telegram. Stop. Granger filed claim Tennessee courts. Stop. Alleging fraud and theft. Stop. Need testimony and documentation immediately. Stop. Coming to Red Hollow. Stop. Chen arrived 4 days after that, looking tired and worried. He'd brought another lawyer with him, a woman named Margaret Reeves, who specialized in property fraud cases. They set up in the ranch house's main room, spreading papers across the table while Evelyn and Silas explained everything that had happened since Denver. This is more aggressive than I anticipated, Chen admitted. Victor's not just challenging your ownership, he's trying to criminalize it. If he can convince a Tennessee court that you stole the deed rather than inherited it legitimately, he can potentially have you arrested. That would complicate everything. Can he actually do that? Silas asked. Maybe. If your father's testimony is convincing enough, and if Victor's lawyers can build a compelling narrative that you acted fraudulently, then yes. It's a long shot, but it's not impossible. Chen looked at Evelyn seriously. We need counter-testimony. People who can verify your mother's wishes, the legitimate transfer of the property, your right to ownership. Who from Tennessee would be willing to testify on your behalf? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, No one. There must be someone, a family friend, a neighbor, someone who knew your mother. My mother's friends were all connected to my father. They won't risk his anger by helping me. Our neighbors minded their own business, and anyone who might have helped, anyone who knew my mother well enough to testify about her wishes, they're either dead or too afraid of my father to speak up. Margaret Reeves leaned forward. What about church records? Baptism certificates, marriage licenses, any documentation that establishes your identity and your mother's relationship to the property? All controlled by my father. He has connections with the parish. If he doesn't want documents released, they won't be released. Medical records? School records? Same problem. Small town. Everyone knows everyone. My father owns half the businesses and has political connections. Anyone who helps me risks losing everything. The lawyers exchanged worried glances. Chen rubbed his face with both hands. This is problematic, he said. Without testimony or documentation from Tennessee, we're trying to prove your case using only the deed itself and your word. That might be enough in Colorado, where we already have registration, but in Tennessee, where Victor has resources and your father's backing, it's going to be extremely difficult. So what do we do? Silas asked. Margaret spoke up. We focus on what we can prove. The deed is legitimate. It has proper seals, signatures, legal language. We can get handwriting experts to verify your mother's signature. We can establish that the deed was filed legally in Colorado territorial records. We build a case based on documentation rather than testimony. Will that be enough? Against Victor Granger with unlimited money and your father's testimony? Honestly, I don't know, but it's what we have. That night, after the lawyers had left to find rooms in town, Evelyn stood at the bedroom window, staring out at the dark hills. I should go back, she said quietly. Silas, who'd been checking the rifle he now kept beside the bed, looked up sharply. What? To Tennessee. Face my father directly. Make him tell the truth. That's insane. You go back there, Victor will have you arrested immediately. He's already filed criminal charges. The moment you cross into Tennessee, you're vulnerable. But if I could talk to my father, he testified against you. He chose Victor's money over his own daughter. What makes you think talking to him would change anything? Evelyn's shoulders slumped. Because I need to believe there's some part of him that's still human, that still remembers my mother loved me, that might care, even a little bit, about what happens to me. Silas crossed the room and stood beside her at the window. Your father had years to show he cared. He didn't. Going back won't change that. It'll just put you in danger. Then what's the alternative? We sit here and hope the lawyers can work miracles? Wait for Victor to find some new way to attack us? We keep fighting, with every tool we have. I'm tired of fighting. I know. But you're also too stubborn to quit. Evelyn looked at him, and despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched. You think you know me so well. Getting there. She leaned against him slightly, and Silas put his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that for a while, watching darkness settle over the valley. Finally, Evelyn said, If we lose everything, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me. I chose this. I'd choose it again. Even knowing how complicated it would get? Especially knowing that. The legal battle that followed was brutal and exhausting. Chen and Reeves worked tirelessly, filing motions, gathering documentation, building the strongest case they could with limited resources. But Victor's lawyers were relentless. Every time Chen scored a small victory, they'd file a new challenge. Every piece of evidence Reeves presented, they'd counter with testimony from people in Tennessee who claimed Evelyn had always been unstable, dishonest, prone to fantasy. The character assassination was methodical and vicious. Victor's lawyers painted Evelyn as a disturbed woman who'd fabricated her mother's wishes, forged documents, and fled to avoid facing justice. They brought in neighbors who testified that Evelyn had always been difficult, odd, antisocial. They produced medical records, somehow obtained despite privacy laws, showing Evelyn had seen a doctor for melancholy and nerves years ago, using that as evidence of mental instability. Reading the court filings made Silas physically ill. They were taking Evelyn's entire life and twisting it into something ugly and false. Her isolation became proof of antisocial behavior. Her escape became evidence of guilt. Her weight. They even brought that into it, suggesting she was emotionally unstable because she lacked self-control around food. This isn't about the land anymore, Silas said to Chen after reading a particularly vicious filing. This is personal. They're trying to destroy her. Yes, Chen agreed quietly. Victor Granger is a vindictive man. He's not just trying to win the property. He's trying to punish Evelyn for leaving him, make an example of her. Can we stop it? We're trying. But character assassination is hard to defend against, especially when the other side has unlimited resources for finding people willing to testify. Evelyn grew quieter as the weeks passed. She still worked the ranch, still managed daily life, but Silas could see the toll it was taking. The constant attacks on her character, her sanity, her very right to exist as she was. It was wearing her down in ways the physical threats never had. One morning, Silas found her in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with tears running silently down her face. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her. They're winning, she said. Not in court, maybe, but in my head. They're making me doubt myself, making me wonder if maybe I am crazy for thinking I could ever escape, for thinking I deserve better than what Victor offered. You're not crazy. They have 10 people willing to testify I am. 10 people who'll stand in court and say I was always unstable, always difficult, always wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe Stop. Silas turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Listen to me. They're lying. All of them. They're lying because Victor is paying them to lie, or because they're afraid of your father, or because they're small people who feel big when they tear others down. But none of it's true. You are not crazy. You are not unstable. You are a woman who refused to let cruel people break you, and that's not a flaw. That's strength. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like I'm drowning. Then I'll keep pulling you up, as many times as it takes. Evelyn looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Why do you care so much? I brought nothing but trouble to your life. Your ranch is falling apart because we're spending all our time fighting my battles. Your savings are gone. Your peace is gone. Why don't you just walk away? It was the third time she'd asked some version of that question, and Silas finally had an answer. Because I love you, he said simply. Evelyn stared at him. What? I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe that first day when you walked up my road looking like you'd fight anyone who got in your way. Maybe when you hit Victor with a skillet. Maybe it was gradual, building over every breakfast, every evening on the porch, every time you refused to break even when breaking would have been easier. But it's real, and I'm not walking away. You can't love me. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and stronger than you think. I know you make good coffee and terrible jokes. I know you sing to the chickens when you think no one's listening. I know you cry during thunderstorms but face down armed men without flinching. That's enough to love. Evelyn was crying again, but differently now. I don't know how to be loved. Then we'll figure it out together, same as everything else. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his shoulder, and Silas held her while she cried. Not the desperate tears of defeat, but the complicated ones that come when someone offers you something precious you're afraid to break. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Margaret Reeves had been quietly investigating Victor's business dealings, looking for anything that might undermine his credibility. What she found was explosive. Victor's mining consortium wasn't just fraudulent in its claim to Evelyn's property, it was fraudulent in general. He'd been selling shares in the consortium to investors back east, promising returns on silver mining operations that didn't exist yet. He'd taken their money and used it to fund his legal battles, essentially running a con to finance his vendetta against Evelyn. This is securities fraud, Reeves explained, spreading documents across the ranch table. He's selling investment opportunities in a mining operation he doesn't legally control, using money from those sales to try to steal the property that would legitimize the operation. It's circular fraud. If we can prove it, and we can, Victor faces criminal charges much more serious than anything he's trying to pin on Evelyn. Can we use this in the Tennessee case? Chen asked. We can do better than that. We can turn this information over to federal authorities. Mining operations and investment securities cross state lines. That makes it a federal matter. If the federal government gets involved, Victor's going to have much bigger problems than fighting over one property deed. Will that stop the Tennessee case? Silas asked. It should. Once federal investigators start looking into Victor's business practices, his credibility evaporates. No judge is going to take seriously a fraud claim brought by someone actively under investigation for fraud themselves. It was the first genuinely good news they'd had in weeks. Evelyn looked at the documents with something like hope dawning on her face. You can really prove this. Already have. The paper trail is extensive. Victor's not as careful as he thinks he is. Margaret has everything documented, witnessed, notarized. It's airtight. So we go on offense, Silas said. Exactly. We stop defending against Victor's attacks and start attacking his foundation. Once his investors realize he's been defrauding them, once federal authorities get involved, the whole house of cards collapses. The shift in tactics changed everything. Chen and Reeves filed formal complaints with federal authorities, provided documentation of Victor's fraud, and quietly reached out to several of his defrauded investors with evidence of what he'd done with their money. The response was swift and devastating. Within 2 weeks, federal investigators had opened a formal case. Three of Victor's largest investors filed lawsuits demanding their money back. The Tennessee court, facing evidence that the plaintiff in the property case was under federal investigation for fraud, suspended proceedings pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Victor's entire legal strategy crumbled. The news reached Red Hollow via telegraph from Chen. Federal case proceeding. Stop. Tennessee court suspended. Granger case, stop. Recommend filing countersuit for harassment and legal abuse. Stop. You're winning. Stop. Evelyn read the telegram 3 times, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. We're winning, she said wonderingly. You're winning, Silas corrected. No. We. You did this. You stood by me when you didn't have to. You fought battles you shouldn't have had to fight. This isn't just my victory. She kissed him then, properly, for the first time. It was awkward and unexpected and perfect, and when they broke apart, both of them were smiling. Well, Silas said, that was worth waiting for. Don't let it go to your head. Too late. But the victory, as sweet as it was, came with complications. Victor, facing federal charges and mounting civil lawsuits, grew desperate. Desperate men were dangerous men. The attack came on a cold November night. Silas woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, still caught in memories of the first attack when Victor's men had set fire to the barn. Then he heard Evelyn scream. He was up and moving before his mind fully caught up, grabbing the rifle beside the bed. Smoke was pouring under the bedroom door. Thick, black, toxic. The house was on fire. "The window!" Silas shouted, already moving toward it. The bedroom was on the ground floor, the window large enough to climb through. He shoved it open and helped Evelyn through first, then followed, hitting the ground hard enough to jar his teeth. Outside, the house was fully engulfed. Flames poured from every window, eating through the roof. And standing in the yard, watching it burn with satisfaction on his face, was Victor Granger. He wasn't alone. 4 men stood with him, all armed. But these weren't professional gunfighters. They looked scared, jumpy, like men who'd been paid to do something they weren't sure about. "Thought I'd save the courts some time," Victor called out. He was drunk, Silas realized. Drunk and desperate and past caring about consequences. No property, no case, no problem. "You're insane," Evelyn said. She was shaking, whether from cold or fear or rage, Silas couldn't tell. "You're under federal investigation. You burn our house down. You're adding arson to the charges. Don't care anymore. You ruined me. Cost me everything. Only fair I return the favor." Silas raised the rifle, but Victor's men raised theirs faster. Mexican standoff, guns pointed in multiple directions, the burning house throwing wild shadows across the yard. "You can't shoot all of us," one of Victor's men said nervously. "Don't have to," Silas replied. "Just have to shoot him." He kept the rifle trained on Victor. "Your boss burns to death. How much you think you're getting paid?" The men exchanged glances. They were hired help, not loyal followers. The math was simple. Victor dead meant no payment, and federal investigators asking questions meant their involvement in arson would come to light. One by one, the men lowered their weapons. "You idiots!" Victor screamed. "I paid you!" "Not enough for this," one of them said, already backing toward the horses. "You're on your own, Granger." They rode off, leaving Victor alone with his rage and a rifle pointed at his chest. "It's over," Evelyn said quietly. "You've lost everything. Your business, your reputation, your freedom. Let it go." "Never." Victor pulled his pistol, but his movements were sloppy, slowed by alcohol. Silas fired first. The bullet took Victor in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the pistol, clutching at the wound, his face twisted with shock and pain. Behind him, the house collapsed inward with a roar of falling timber and exploding sparks. "That's for every time you made her feel worthless," Silas said coldly. Victor fell to his knees, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're going to hang for this." "No, you attacked us, burned our property, pulled a weapon. This is self-defense. And unlike you, we have witnesses." Sam Tucker and 2 other ranchers emerged from the darkness, rifles ready. They'd been watching the property since hearing about Victor's increasingly erratic behavior. They'd seen everything. "Federal marshals are already on their way," Sam said. "Sent my boy to fetch them an hour ago when we saw these bastards approaching. Should be here by dawn." Victor looked around at the circle of witnesses, at his own blood pooling in the dirt. at the burning house and his destroyed plans. Something broke in his face. "She was mine," he said, almost whimpering. "The land was mine. She was supposed to be grateful. I gave her everything." "You gave her nothing but pain," Evelyn said. "And now you have nothing. No land, no freedom, no power over me. We're done." She turned her back on him and walked away. Silas followed, leaving Sam and the others to guard Victor until the marshals arrived. They stood together watching the house burn, everything they'd built together being consumed by flames. Evelyn was crying silently, and Silas put his arm around her. "We'll rebuild," he said. "I know." Stronger this time. "I know that too." The flames climbed higher, carrying sparks up into the cold night sky. Everything inside was gone. Their clothes, their furniture, the small, comfortable life they'd been building. But the deed was safe, secured in the bank in Denver weeks ago. The land was theirs. Their future was intact. And Victor Granger, bleeding in the dirt while awaiting arrest, had finally learned that some women couldn't be broken, no matter how hard you tried. Dawn came cold and gray. The federal marshals arrived and took Victor into custody, adding arson and attempted murder to his growing list of charges. His shoulder wound wasn't life-threatening, but it would leave a scar. Silas hoped it hurt for the rest of his life. In the weeks that followed, the legal situation resolved with surprising speed. Victor, facing overwhelming evidence and multiple federal charges, accepted a plea agreement that involved substantial prison time. His consortium was dissolved, his investors compensated from his remaining assets. The Tennessee property case was formally dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. Evelyn's ownership of the Copper Ridge property was uncontested and absolute. She cried when Chen brought the final paperwork. Not sad tears, but the complicated ones that come when something you've fought for desperately is finally, truly yours. "It's over," she said, holding the documents like they might disappear. "It's over," Chen confirmed. "Victor's in federal prison. Your father has no legal standing to challenge anything. The property is yours, registered in multiple jurisdictions, protected by court order. You're free." Free. The word felt strange and new and impossibly precious. They spent the winter living with Sam Tucker while they rebuilt. The new house was smaller than the first, but better constructed. Silas designed it with Evelyn's input this time. A proper kitchen with good light, a bedroom with space for a real bed, a porch that faced west to catch the sunset. They worked side by side, laying foundations and raising walls. And somewhere in the process of building something together, they became more than survival partners. They became a unit, a team, a marriage that was real in every sense that mattered. Spring came, and with it, news from Tennessee. Professional surveyors had confirmed substantial silver deposits on the Copper Ridge property. Developers were interested in leasing mineral rights. The land Evelyn's mother had left her wasn't just valuable, it was worth a fortune. "We could sell," Silas said one evening, looking at the offers spread across their new kitchen table. "Pay off all the debts, have enough left over to live comfortably for years. Or we could lease the mineral rights and maintain ownership," Evelyn said. "Keep the land in the family. Use the lease income to expand the ranch, maybe help other women who are trying to escape situations like mine." Silas looked at her. "You want to help others?" "Someone helped me. You helped me. Chen and Margaret helped me. Sam and Bill and all the ranchers who stood watch helped me. Maybe it's time to pass that forward." So they did. They leased the mineral rights for a substantial annual fee and used the income to expand the ranch and establish a fund that helped women escaping abuse relocate west. It wasn't charity, Evelyn hated charity, but practical support, train fare, legal fees, a place to stay while getting established. Word spread. Women started arriving in Red Hollow, tentative and scared, carrying everything they owned in single bags. Evelyn met each one personally, never judging, never pitying, just helping. "I was you," she'd tell them. "I know what it takes to run, but I also know you can build something better on the other side. Let us help you start." The ranch prospered. Red Hollow grew from a frontier town into a real settlement, and Evelyn Mercer, once dismissed as plain, undesirable, worthless, became known throughout the territory as a woman who'd stood against impossible odds and won. But she never forgot where she'd started, or the man who'd stood beside her when no one else would. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains red and gold, Evelyn leaned against Silas's shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. When everyone else looked through me or past me or at me with judgment, you actually saw me. That's rarer than you think." Silas kissed the top of her head. "You're hard to miss. I used to be invisible. Never to me." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The new house creaked gently in the evening breeze. Everything was quiet and peaceful, and theirs. "Do you think we'll ever stop waiting for the next disaster?" Evelyn asked. "Maybe, eventually, but probably not." "That's honest." "I try." Evelyn laughed softly. "I love you, Silas Mercer." "I love you too, Evelyn Mercer." And in that moment, sitting on a porch they'd built together after losing everything and fighting their way back, surrounded by land that was finally, legally, unquestionably theirs, they were happy. Not because everything was perfect, not because all their problems had disappeared, or because the world had suddenly become fair and kind, but because they'd survived, together. And sometimes survival is its own kind of victory. The best kind, actually. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were honest. That was the difference between survival and actually living. One was about enduring, the other was about building something worth keeping. Evelyn learned this slowly, in pieces, like assembling a puzzle without knowing what the final picture looked like. Some mornings she'd wake up and still feel that old panic, that instinct to check escape routes and count her money and prepare to run. But then Silas would be there beside her, solid and real, and the panic would fade back to wherever it came from. "Bad dream?" he'd ask on those mornings. "Old habit," she'd reply, and he'd nod because he understood that some scars never fully healed. They just became part of the landscape you learned to navigate. The ranch expanded gradually. They hired 2 permanent hands, young men from town who needed work and didn't mind taking orders from a woman. That had been Evelyn's condition when Silas suggested bringing on help. She'd be involved in the hiring, the management, all of it. No more sitting quietly while men made decisions about her life. "You think they'll respect you?" Silas had asked, not challenging, just curious. "I think they'll respect competence, and if they don't, they can work somewhere else." She'd been right. The hands, Jacob and Thomas, brothers barely out of their teens, quickly learned that Evelyn knew more about running a ranch than most men twice her age. She'd spent those early months watching everything Silas did, asking questions, learning. Now she could repair fence as well as anyone, treat a sick horse, manage the books, and plan for seasons ahead. "Your wife's tougher than you are," Jacob told Silas one afternoon, grinning. "I know," Silas replied, and there wasn't an ounce of shame in it. The women started arriving in the second year. First one, then 3, then a steady trickle of scared faces carrying worn bags and looking over their shoulders. Word had spread somehow, the way desperate information always did. There was a place in Red Hollow where women running from bad situations could find help. No questions asked, no judgment given. Evelyn met each one the same way. A firm handshake, direct eye contact, and simple words. "You're safe here. Tell me what you need." What they needed varied. Some needed money for train fare to go further west. Some needed legal help, lawyers who could file papers or navigate property disputes. Some just needed time, weeks or months to catch their breath, figure out their next move, remember who they were before fear became their primary identity. Evelyn never told them what to do. She'd hated when people did that to her, acted like her life was simple enough to fix with advice. Instead, she'd sit with them on the porch, these frightened women with their desperate eyes, and she'd say, "Here's what I did. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't. You decide what makes sense for you." Most of them stared at her at first, like they couldn't quite believe this heavy-set, plain-spoken woman was the legendary Evelyn Mercer they'd heard about, like they'd expected someone more obviously strong, more conventionally heroic. "I know," Evelyn would say, reading their expressions. "I don't look like much, but neither do you probably. That's the point. We don't have to look like anything except ourselves." One woman, Sarah, young and pregnant, fleeing a husband who'd broken her arm twice, asked the question most of them were thinking, "How did you stop being afraid?" Evelyn had considered this carefully before answering. I didn't. I'm still afraid sometimes. Fear doesn't just disappear because your circumstances improve. But I learned to do things anyway, to act despite being scared. That's not bravery exactly. It's just stubbornness. And stubbornness is something we can all manage. Sarah had nodded slowly, like this was a revelation. I can be stubborn. Then you're already halfway there. The fund they'd established grew as the mineral leases generated steady income. Evelyn kept meticulous records, every dollar spent, every woman helped, every outcome tracked. She wanted proof that this mattered, that the money her mother's land generated was doing something worthwhile. Silas sometimes found her late at night, reviewing the ledgers by lamplight, her face tired but satisfied. You're going to work yourself to death, he'd say. Better than the alternative. Which is? Sitting around being grateful I survived. I didn't survive just to stop moving. He'd pull up a chair beside her and they'd work together in comfortable silence. This, Evelyn thought, was what marriage actually looked like. Not grand gestures or constant romance, but two people sitting at a table past midnight, managing accounts and making plans and occasionally arguing about whether they could afford to help another woman or needed to save money for winter feed. We can do both, Evelyn would insist. We can't, Silas would counter, showing her the numbers. Then we find a way to make more money. Evelyn, I'm serious. We expand the herd, negotiate better lease terms, something. I'm not turning away women who need help because we're being cautious with finances. These arguments never turn mean. Silas had learned early that Evelyn's intensity wasn't anger. It was passion. She cared deeply about things, and when she committed to something, she committed completely. It was one of the things he loved about her, even when it complicated their budget planning. The pregnancy came as a surprise. Evelyn was 32, not young by frontier standards, and they'd both assumed children might not happen. They hadn't tried to prevent it, but they hadn't actively pursued it either. It just sort of occurred the way natural things do when you stop fighting them. Evelyn realized first, recognizing the signs from helping other women. She sat with the knowledge for 3 days before telling Silas, trying to figure out how she felt about it. Terrified, mostly, but also something else. Something that might have been hope. She told him on a Sunday morning, both of them sitting on the porch with coffee and watching the valley wake up. I'm pregnant, she said, no preamble. Silas went very still. Then he set down his coffee carefully, like he needed both hands free for whatever came next. You're sure? Pretty sure. I'll see the doctor tomorrow to confirm, but yes, I'm sure. How do you feel? It was the right question, not congratulations or assumptions of joy, just genuine curiosity about her emotional state. This was why she'd married him. Scared, she admitted. I don't know how to be a mother. My own mother died when I was 17, and my father was, well, you know what he was. I don't have good models for this. You'll figure it out, same as everything else. Children aren't fence posts, Silas. I can't just trial and error my way through raising a human being. Why not? Everyone else does. Despite her anxiety, Evelyn laughed. That's not reassuring. Wasn't trying to be reassuring. Was trying to be honest. He took her hand. You're going to be terrified, and you're going to make mistakes, and some days you're going to wonder what the hell you were thinking. But you're also going to love this kid fiercely, and you're going to fight for them the way you fight for everything else that matters. That's all any parent can do. What if I'm bad at it? Then you'll be bad at it sometimes and good at it other times. That's how life works. The pregnancy was difficult. Evelyn was sick constantly in the first months, exhausted in the middle ones, and uncomfortable in the final stretch. Her body, already heavy, swelled in ways that made simple tasks complicated. She hated feeling limited, hated that her expanding belly prevented her from doing ranch work the way she wanted. You need to rest, Silas insisted after finding her trying to move a heavy feed sack in her 8th month. I need to work, not like this. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm not some delicate flower, I know that, but you're also 8 months pregnant and stubborn enough to injure yourself proving a point. Sit down. Let Jacob handle it. They'd argued about it, Evelyn furious and frustrated, Silas calm but immovable. Eventually she'd given in, though she'd hated every minute of forced inactivity. Sitting on the porch watching other people work felt like failure. One of the women staying at the ranch, Martha, middle-aged and escaping 20 years of marriage to a violent drunk, sat beside her one afternoon. You're angry, Martha observed. I'm useless. You're growing a human being. That's not useless. It feels useless. I can't contribute, can't help. Just sit here like a burden. Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what you taught me? That helping doesn't look like one thing. Sometimes help is action, fighting, running, building, but sometimes it's presence. Being there. Showing other people it's possible to survive and still be human on the other side. You're doing that right now. Every woman who comes here sees you. Pregnant, uncomfortable, still here, still fighting. That matters." Evelyn wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe just existing visibly, refusing to hide or diminish herself, was its own form of resistance. The baby came on a February morning, cold and clear, after 16 hours of labor that left Evelyn exhausted and swearing she'd never do this again. "I mean it," she told Silas, gripping his hand hard enough to hurt. "This is the only one. I don't care what anyone says about needing more children. This is it." "Understood," Silas said, not pointing out that she'd been saying variations of this for the past 12 hours. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, healthy and loud, Evelyn held her with shaking hands and felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. This small, red-faced creature was hers. Actually, hers. No one could take her away or claim she didn't deserve her or suggest she'd be better off somewhere else. "She's perfect," Silas said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's wrinkled and angry-looking. Like her mother." Evelyn laughed, exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than she knew how to process. "We should name her after my mother, Catherine, if that's all right." "Catherine Mercer." Silas tested the name. "I like it." They decided weeks ago that if the baby was a girl, Evelyn would choose the name. If a boy, Silas would. It seemed fair, though Silas had secretly been hoping for a girl. Girls got to be strong in ways boys weren't always allowed. He wanted to raise someone who'd be as fierce as her mother. Motherhood didn't come naturally to Evelyn. She'd hoped it would, some magical maternal instinct that would tell her what to do. But mostly she felt confused and incompetent. Catherine cried and Evelyn couldn't always figure out why. She'd try feeding, changing, rocking, singing, everything she could think of. And sometimes the baby would just keep crying, and Evelyn would want to cry too. "I'm terrible at this," she told Silas after a particularly rough night. "You're learning. There's a difference. Other women make it look easy. Other women are lying about how hard it is, trust me." The women staying at the ranch helped, taking turns so Evelyn could sleep, offering advice without judgment. It created a strange, makeshift family. Women who'd fled violence finding community and helping each other survive the aftermath. They traded skills and stories, teaching each other how to manage with limited resources and damaged confidence. Sarah, the young pregnant woman from months earlier, had stayed at the ranch. Her baby, a boy named James, was 2 months older than Catherine. She and Evelyn would sit together on the porch, nursing their children and talking about everything except the men who'd hurt them. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked one afternoon. "Tennessee. Your home." Evelyn considered this. "Sometimes. Not the people or the situation, but the land itself. The mountains. The way spring smelled there. But I don't miss it enough to go back. This is home now. Do you think we'll ever stop looking over our shoulders?" "I don't know, maybe. My husband says some scars stay forever. You just learn to live with them. Your husband's smart. Don't tell him that. He'll get insufferable." They'd laughed, and Catherine had made a small noise against Evelyn's chest, and Evelyn had felt a contentment so complete it almost hurt. "This," she thought, "this is what I ran toward. Not just safety, but the possibility of moments like this. Peace. Community. Choice." The years continued their steady march. Catherine grew from infant to toddler to a small person with opinions and questions and her mother's stubbornness. She learned to walk on the porch Silas had built, taking her first steps between her parents with the mountains as backdrop. "She's going to be trouble," Silas predicted, watching their daughter toddle around with single-minded determination. "Good," Evelyn said. "Trouble is useful." Red Hollow continued growing around them. The town that had once mocked Evelyn now treated her with wary respect. She'd become someone you didn't cross, not because she was cruel, but because she'd proven herself tougher than assumptions. The women she'd helped spread out across the territory, building lives, and their success reflected back on her. Some of the women who'd stayed at the ranch moved on, finding work, remarrying, heading further west. Others settled permanently in Red Hollow, forming a community of survivors who understood each other in ways outsiders couldn't. Martha opened a boarding house for working women. Sarah started a small dressmaking business. Others found their own paths, but they all stayed connected to the ranch, to Evelyn, to the place that had given them time to breathe and regroup. "You built something," Silas told Evelyn one evening, both of them watching Catherine play in the yard. "We built something," Evelyn corrected. "No, this part's yours. I just provided the location." Evelyn leaned against him, tired but satisfied. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." "Maybe, but you would have found a way. You always do." News from Tennessee came sporadically. Victor remained in federal prison, his sentence lengthy enough that he'd be an old man before release. Evelyn's father had died 2 years after her escape, heart failure, according to the telegram from a distant cousin. Evelyn had felt nothing reading that news. Not grief, not relief. Just a kind of empty acknowledgement that he'd existed and now didn't. "Should we go back?" Silas had asked. "For the funeral or to settle affairs?" "No, there's nothing there I want. The property's managed by lawyers. The rest can rot for all I care." It had sounded harsh, but it was honest. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. Some family ties were better left severed. The Copper Ridge property continued generating income through mineral leases. Every quarter, a bank draft would arrive, and Evelyn would deposit it into the fund that supported the women's network she'd accidentally created. The money her mother had left her was doing exactly what her mother had hoped, providing freedom, options, choices for women who'd been told they had none. Catherine grew up surrounded by women who'd survived impossible situations. She absorbed their strength without understanding its source, the way children absorb everything. By the time she was 5, she was declaring her opinions loudly and refusing to accept limitations simply because she was female. "I want to learn to rope cattle," she announced one morning. "You're 5, Evelyn pointed out. "So? Jacob learned when he was 5. Jacob was helping his family survive. You don't need to rope cattle." "I want to anyway." Silas had hidden his smile behind his coffee cup, while Evelyn tried to figure out how to argue with her own logic thrown back at her. Eventually they'd compromised. Catherine could learn ranch work, but slowly, appropriately for her age. "She's exactly like you," Silas told Evelyn after one particularly stubborn negotiation with their daughter. "I know, it's exhausting. Now you understand what I deal with." Evelyn had thrown a dish towel at him, and they'd both laughed, and Catherine had looked at them like they were crazy, which they probably were, crazy and happy and building something that mattered. One evening, when Catherine was 6 and running around the yard with Martha's grandson, Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The same mountains she'd seen that first day stepping off the stagecoach, terrified and desperate, and certain she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd been so wrong. "You all right?" Silas asked, coming up behind her. "I was just thinking about that first day. How scared I was. How sure I was that I'd traded one bad situation for another. And I was an idiot. This is the best decision I ever made. Coming west? Coming here. To you. To this." She gestured at the yard, the ranch, the mountains beyond. "I thought I was running away from something. Turns out I was running toward something better. I just didn't know it yet." Silas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that, watching their daughter play in the light fade from gold to purple to deep blue. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "Me too." And she meant it, every word, every feeling behind the words. This life they'd built, messy and complicated and sometimes still scary, was hers. Actually, completely, undeniably hers. No one could take it away. She'd made sure of that. The challenge came from an unexpected direction, the way most real problems do. Not from men with guns or lawyers with paperwork, but from something quieter and more insidious: doubt. Catherine was 8 when she started asking questions about her mother's past. Not the sanitized version Evelyn had prepared, full of vague references to coming west for opportunity, but real questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "Mama, why do the women who stay here all look scared?" They were sitting on the porch, Evelyn mending a shirt while Catherine practiced her letters on a slate. The question came out of nowhere, the way children's questions always did. Evelyn set down her needle carefully. They're not scared, they're just careful. That's not true. I see how they look around like something bad might happen. Sarah does it. Martha used to do it. You do it too sometimes. I don't. You do. When strangers come to the ranch, your whole body changes, like you're getting ready to run. 8 years old and already seeing too much. Evelyn wondered if this was what happened when you raise children in truth instead of comfortable lies. They learn to recognize reality earlier than they should have to. The women who come here, Evelyn said slowly, they've been hurt by people who were supposed to protect them. So yes, they're careful. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Were you hurt? Yes. By who? By someone I was supposed to marry, and by my father, who should have protected me but didn't. Catherine absorbed this with the serious expression she got when processing difficult information. Is that why we came here? To get away from them? Yes. Did Papa save you? It was the question Evelyn had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The heroic narrative everyone wanted to assign to her story. The strong man rescuing the helpless woman. It was cleaner that way, easier to digest. But it wasn't true. No, Evelyn said firmly. I saved myself. I ran across half the country alone with nothing but one bag and a deed I'd stolen from my father's safe. I made it to Red Hollow on my own. Papa helped me after that, but the saving part? That was me. Oh, Catherine thought about this. Good. Good? I'd rather you saved yourself. That means I can save myself too, if I need to. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, pride and pain mixed together. Yes, you can save yourself, but hopefully you'll never need to. But if I do, I'll know how. Yes, you'll know how. The conversation stayed with Evelyn for days afterward, nagging at something she couldn't quite identify. She'd built a life based on the idea that strength meant surviving, that victory meant escaping. But what did it mean to raise a daughter in the aftermath of that escape? How did you teach her to be strong without teaching her to expect violence? How did you prepare her for the world's cruelty without stealing her ability to trust? She brought it up with Silas one night after Catherine had gone to bed. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Motherhood, not the practical parts. I figured out feeding and clothing and basic care, but the philosophical parts. What do I teach her about the world? About men? About herself? Silas was quiet for a moment, the way he got when thinking carefully about words. You teach her the truth, that the world can be cruel, but it can also be beautiful. That some people will hurt her, but others will stand beside her. That her worth isn't determined by what others think of her. That's a lot of nuance for an 8-year-old. She's your daughter. She can handle nuance. What if I teach her to be too hard, too guarded? What if I damage her by making her see threats everywhere? Evelyn. Silas turned to face her directly. You're not your father. You're not Victor. You're not going to damage her by being honest about your experiences. If anything, you'll give her tools to navigate her own life. That's what good parents do. How do you know? Your parents died when you were 16. Mine were useless. Neither of us has good models for this. No, but we have each other. And we have common sense. And we have the ability to admit when we're wrong and adjust accordingly. That's more than a lot of parents have. It should have been reassuring, but Evelyn still felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Every decision she made, every word she spoke around Catherine was shaping another human being. The power of that was terrifying. The real test came the following spring, when Catherine was 9. A family moved to Red Hollow from Missouri. The Hendersons, respectable people with money and connections. They had 2 daughters, Clara and Elizabeth, both around Catherine's age. Within weeks, the Henderson girls had become the social center of Red Hollow's small community of children. Catherine came home from town one afternoon with red eyes and a tight jaw. What happened? Evelyn asked immediately. Nothing. That's not true. Catherine dropped her school books on the table with more force than necessary. Clara Henderson said I'm too fat to play their games. Said I'd break the swing if I tried to use it. Elizabeth laughed. Evelyn felt rage ignite in her chest. The old, familiar anger that came from years of hearing similar comments directed at herself. But she forced it down, made herself think before speaking. What did you say? Nothing. I just left. Do you believe them? That you're too fat? Catherine's face crumpled. I don't know. Am I? Evelyn pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Catherine to join her. When her daughter sat, Evelyn took both of her hands. Listen to me carefully. People will say cruel things about your body for the rest of your life, about how much space you take up, how you look, whether you meet their standards of acceptable. It won't stop and it won't make sense, and it will hurt every single time. That's the truth. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Then what do I do? You remember that their cruelty says nothing about you and everything about them. You remember that your body is yours, not theirs to judge or comment on. You remember that taking up space isn't a crime, and neither is existing in a body that doesn't match what narrow-minded people think is acceptable. Evelyn squeezed her hands. And you remember that your mother survived much worse than Clara Henderson's opinion, and you're just as strong as I am. But it still hurts. Yes, it still hurts. And that's all right. You're allowed to hurt. Just don't let that hurt convince you there's something wrong with you. The wrongness is in them. Catherine nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Mama, were you like me when you were little? Did people say mean things? Yes, constantly, and I believed them for years. Thought if people kept saying the same things, they must be true. It took me a long time to learn they were wrong. How long? Too long. That's why I'm telling you now, so you don't waste years believing lies. The conversation didn't fix everything. Catherine still came home sometimes with that same tight jaw, that same hurt expression, but she also started pushing back. When Clara Henderson made another comment about her weight, Catherine looked her straight in the eye and said, My mother taught me that cruel people usually feel small inside. Is that true for you? It had caused a minor scandal in Red Hollow. Mrs. Henderson had complained to Evelyn about her daughter's rudeness. Evelyn had listened politely and then said, My daughter was responding to your daughter's cruelty. If you want Catherine to be more polite, perhaps Clara should be less vicious. Mrs. Henderson had sputtered and left in a huff, but the message was clear. The Mercers weren't going to accept casual cruelty anymore. Not directed at Catherine, and not directed at any of the women who stayed at their ranch. Word spread, the way it always did in small towns. Some people thought Evelyn was too defensive, too quick to see insults. Others quietly appreciated that someone was finally calling out behavior everyone had tolerated for too long. You're making enemies, Silas pointed out after another confrontation with a town matron who'd made disparaging comments about the questionable women at the Mercer Ranch. Good. I'd rather have honest enemies than false friends. You're also making things harder for Catherine. She's going to be judged because of your reputation. She's already being judged because of her body. At least this way, she knows I'm fighting alongside her instead of telling her to accept cruelty quietly. Silas studied her face for a moment, then nodded. You're right. I just worry. I know. But I spent too many years being quiet, trying not to upset people, hoping if I was good enough they'd accept me. It never worked. I'm done teaching my daughter to shrink herself for other people's comfort. The years continued their steady progression. Catherine grew from girl to young woman, inheriting her mother's build and her father's steady temperament. She was never going to be delicate or conventionally pretty, but she was strong and smart and capable of fixing almost anything that broke on the ranch. I want to manage the mineral leases, she announced when she was 15. The paperwork, the negotiations, all of it. You and Papa are getting older. Someone needs to learn how it works. Evelyn had felt a complicated mix of pride and loss. Her daughter was growing up, preparing to take over responsibilities that had defined Evelyn's adult life. It was what she'd wanted, Catherine capable and competent, but it also meant time was passing, childhood ending, the future arriving faster than expected. All right, Evelyn said. We'll start with the quarterly reports. You'll review them with me, learn what everything means, then we'll move to correspondence with the mining companies. And eventually I'll handle negotiations? Eventually, when you're ready. I'm ready now. You think you are. There's a difference. Catherine had scowled, but accepted the limitation. Over the next several years, she absorbed everything about managing the Copper Ridge property, the legal language, the financial calculations, the careful negotiations with mining companies that always tried to take advantage if they sensed weakness. By the time she was 18, Catherine was handling most of the correspondence herself. She was good at it, better than Evelyn in some ways. She had a sharp eye for deceptive contract language and a stubborn refusal to accept less than fair terms. "She's going to be formidable," Robert Chen said during one of his visits to review legal documents. He was older now, gray-haired but still sharp. "Your daughter has a gift for this kind of work. She gets it from her grandmother," Evelyn said, "the woman who left me the land. She was smart about property and business. That intelligence skipped my father and came through the women. Speaking of which, I have news about the property. The mining company wants to buy it outright. They're offering a substantial sum." Evelyn's first instinct was immediate refusal. The land was hers, fought for and protected. Selling felt like betrayal. But then she thought about it more carefully, about what the money could do, about what Catherine might want, about whether holding on to something simply because you'd fought for it was actually wise. "How substantial?" she asked. Chen named a figure that made Evelyn's breath catch. Enough money to set up Catherine for life, to expand the Women's Fund exponentially, to do more good than she'd ever imagined possible. "I need to think about it," she said, "and talk to my family." That night, she and Silas and Catherine sat on the porch, the same porch where so many important conversations had happened, and discussed the offer. "It's your decision," Silas said immediately. "The land is yours. Whatever you decide, I support." "It's our decision," Evelyn corrected. "This affects all of us, Catherine especially." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. Finally, she said, "What would grandmother have wanted?" "I think she'd want the land to do good, to provide freedom and options, the way she intended when she left it to me. Then sell it, use the money to help more women. Build something bigger than just mineral leases. Create a permanent fund that will keep helping people long after we're gone." Evelyn looked at her daughter, this fierce, capable young woman who'd grown up surrounded by survivors and learned to see strength in unexpected places. "You're sure?" "The land already saved you. Let it save others too. That seems like the right way to honor grandmother's gift." So they sold. The process took months, negotiations, legal reviews, endless paperwork. But eventually, the deed to the Copper Ridge property transferred to the mining company, and a bank draft for an almost incomprehensible sum of money transferred to Evelyn. She'd expected to feel loss, grief for the land her mother had left her. Instead, she felt liberated. The property had been both salvation and burden, the thing that had made her valuable to Victor, and the thing that had ultimately destroyed him. Now it was simply money, substantial, useful, capable of doing immense good. They established the Evelyn Mercer Foundation, named for both Evelyn's mother and her daughter. Its mission was simple: provide support for women escaping domestic violence, including legal assistance, relocation funds, temporary housing, and job training. The foundation was large enough to operate in multiple territories, helping hundreds of women each year. Evelyn managed it for the first 5 years, then gradually handed control to Catherine and a board of directors that included Martha, Sarah, and several other women who'd stayed at the ranch. She remained involved but stepped back from daily operations, trusting the next generation to carry the work forward. "I'm getting old," she told Silas one evening. She was 52 now, her hair more gray than dark, her body showing the accumulated wear of hard-lived years. "You're distinguished," Silas replied. He was 56, weathered and strong, still capable of full days of ranch work. "I'm tired." "That too." "Do you think we did it right? The foundation, raising Catherine, all of it?" Silas considered the question seriously. "I think we did it honestly. Whether that's right depends on your definition, but we helped people. We raised a daughter who's strong and kind. We built something that matters. That seems right enough to me." Evelyn leaned against him, comfortable in the familiar weight of his presence. "I never thanked you properly. For that first day, when you could have sent me away but didn't. For standing beside me through everything that followed. For loving me when I didn't think I was lovable. You never needed to thank me. You gave me just as much, probably more. We saved each other. Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the valley, painting everything in shades of gold and purple. The ranch spread out before them, expanded now, prosperous, employing a dozen people and housing rotating groups of women finding their footing. The house had been rebuilt twice, each time larger and more permanent. But the porch remained the same, the place where important conversations happened, where they'd sat through countless evenings, where their life together had been built in small, steady increments. Catherine appeared in the doorway, now 25 and managing the foundation with confidence that still surprised Evelyn sometimes. "Mama, there's a woman here, from Texas. Says she heard about us and traveled 3 weeks to find us. She looks—" Catherine paused. "She looks like you did that first day." Evelyn stood slowly, her joints protesting. "Then I'd better go talk to her." She found the woman in the yard, young, heavy-set, exhausted, carrying a single worn bag and eyes that wouldn't stop searching for exits. The same look Evelyn had seen in her own reflection years ago. "I'm Evelyn Mercer," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to Red Hollow." The woman took her hand tentatively. "I'm Hannah. Hannah Foster. I heard there was a place here where women like me could find help." "Women like you?" "Women running from men who think they own us. Women who everyone says should be grateful for attention, even when that attention feels like prison." Hannah's voice cracked slightly. "I was told you'd understand." Evelyn looked at this frightened young woman and saw her younger self, all the fear and determination and desperate hope that maybe somewhere west there was a life worth living. "I understand," Evelyn said gently. "Better than you know. Come inside. You're safe here. Tell me what you need." As they walked toward the house, Silas watched from the porch. This was what Evelyn did now. Met the frightened women who arrived carrying everything they owned, gave them the same firm handshake and direct gaze she'd wanted someone to give her all those years ago. The cycle continued. Women arrived broken and left whole, or at least more whole than when they'd come. Some stayed in Red Hollow, building new lives. Others moved on, carrying the knowledge that they'd survived and could survive again. The foundation grew, its reach extending across territories. Catherine proved to be a skilled administrator, expanding programs and establishing partnerships with lawyers, doctors, businesses, willing to hire women with complicated pasts. The work that Evelyn had started almost accidentally became an institution. But Evelyn herself grew quieter, more contemplative. She'd spent so many years fighting, first for survival, then for legitimacy, then for others, that stepping back felt strange and unnatural. She had to learn how to exist without constant battle, how to be still without feeling like she was giving up. "What do you do when the war is over?" she asked Martha one afternoon. They were both older now, silver-haired and slower moving, but still sharp. "You remember why you fought in the first place," Martha replied, "and you enjoy the peace you earned. It feels wrong, like I should still be doing something." "You are doing something. You're living, visibly, unapologetically, taking up space and refusing to be ashamed of it. That's radical enough." Martha was right, Evelyn realized. Simply existing as she was, large, plain, opinionated, loved, was itself a form of resistance in a world that told women like her they should diminish themselves. So she learned to be still, to sit on the porch without urgency, to watch Catherine manage the foundation without interfering, to accept that her active fighting days were behind her and that was all right. Silas, who'd always been better at stillness, helped with this transition. They spent more time together, just the two of them, rediscovering the quiet partnership that had started all those years ago in a house that no longer existed. "Do you have regrets?" Evelyn asked him one evening. "About what?" "Everything. Marrying me. The complications I brought, the violence, the legal battles. All of it." Silas was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Evelyn started to worry. Then he said, "My only regret is that I can't go back and tell my younger self that placing that advertisement would be the best decision of my life. Would have saved him some anxiety in those first few weeks. I was terrified those first few weeks." "I know, I could tell. But you stayed anyway." "Where else was I going to go?" "Anywhere. You could have run again, kept moving, but you stayed and fought. That's when I knew you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. Including me. Especially you." They grew old together, which was its own kind of victory. Not dramatic or heroic, just the steady accumulation of days that became years. Silas's hands grew stiff with arthritis. Evelyn's knees protested stares. They moved slower, spoke more carefully, needed more rest. But they were there, present, together. Building a legacy not through grand gestures, but through consistent daily choice to stand beside each other. Catherine married eventually, a quiet man named David who worked as a surveyor and treated her with the steady respect Silas had shown Evelyn. They had 3 children, and Evelyn watched her grandchildren grow up without the fear she'd carried through her own childhood. "They're so confident," she told Silas, watching her oldest grandchild, a girl named Catherine after her grandmother, climb trees and declare her plans to become a doctor. "They don't even question whether they're allowed to want things. That's what you gave them, freedom from doubt." "I gave them nothing. Catherine did that." "Catherine learned it from you." Maybe that was true. Maybe the greatest victory wasn't the dramatic moment when she'd shot Victor, or established the foundation, or won the legal battle. Maybe it was this: grandchildren who grew up believing they could be anything, do anything, take up as much space as they wanted without apology. That was freedom, real, permanent, generational freedom. The end came quietly, as ends often do for people who've lived long, full lives. Evelyn was 68 when she had the stroke. Sudden, severe, stealing her words and half her mobility in an instant. She survived, but diminished. The fierce woman who'd crossed a continent alone now needed help walking from bed to chair. The sharp tongue that had defended so many women could barely form sentences. It was cruel and humiliating, and exactly the kind of ending Evelyn had always feared. But Silas was there. Catherine was there. The community they'd built surrounded her with the same care she'd given so many others. "I hate this," Evelyn managed to say one afternoon, the words slurred but understandable. "I know," Silas replied. "Not how I wanted to end." "You're not ending, you're just slowing down." "Same thing." "No. Ending is giving up, slowing down is accepting reality. There's a difference." Evelyn wanted to argue, but didn't have the energy. So she just held his hand and let herself be cared for, which was harder than any fight she'd ever fought. She lived 3 more years like that, limited, frustrated, but surrounded by love and proof that her life had mattered. Women still arrived at the ranch seeking help, and Catherine would bring them to Evelyn's room so they could meet the woman whose story had started everything. "You're her?" they'd ask, looking at this elderly, partially paralyzed woman in bed. "Was her," Evelyn would correct, her speech still difficult but clearer than it had been. "Now I'm just old." But they didn't see just old, they saw possibility, they saw survival, they saw proof that you could start from nothing and build something lasting. On a warm September evening, with the valley golden in late afternoon light and the whole family gathered around her, Evelyn Mercer closed her eyes and didn't open them again. She died surrounded by the people she'd fought for and the life she'd chosen. And if there was any justice in the universe, that was exactly what she'd earned. The funeral was large. Dozens of women from across multiple territories coming to pay respects to the woman who'd helped them rebuild their lives. Catherine spoke about her mother's strength and stubbornness and unwillingness to accept limitations. Silas said nothing publicly, too overcome to manage words, but everyone who knew them understood what they'd been to each other. They buried Evelyn in a plot overlooking the valley, with a simple headstone that read, Evelyn Vale Mercer, 1845 to 1913. She survived. She fought. She won. 3 months later, Silas followed her. He'd held on long enough to see her properly mourned, to ensure Catherine was settled, to finish the work of a shared life. Then he simply stopped, his heart giving out peacefully in his sleep, joining Evelyn wherever she'd gone. They were buried side by side, 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something lasting from desperation and hope. The foundation continued, expanded. By the 1920s, it was operating in 6 states, helping thousands of women annually. By the 1950s, it had become a national organization, with Catherine's daughter running it. By the present day, the Catherine Vale Mercer Foundation was legendary, one of the largest domestic violence support organizations in the country, helping tens of thousands of women every year. And every woman who passed through its doors learned the story of Evelyn Vale, the frightened woman who stepped off a stagecoach in Red Hollow carrying nothing but a worn leather bag and the courage to believe her life was worth fighting for. They learned that survival isn't always dramatic, that strength doesn't have to look heroic, that sometimes winning just means refusing to quit, day after day, until the battle finally shifts in your favor. They learned that women who society dismisses, too heavy, too plain, too old, too damaged, can build empires if given half a chance and a little support. They learned that love isn't always romantic or easy, but the steady kind that shows up daily and holds your hand through impossible situations might be the most powerful force in existence. And they learned that one woman's choice to run toward freedom instead of accepting captivity had rippled forward through generations, creating waves of change that touched lives she'd never meet in places she'd never see. That was Evelyn's legacy. Not perfection, not flawless heroism, just stubborn, human, messy survival that somehow transformed into something larger than herself. And in Red Hollow, where it all started, there stands a statue now. A broad-hipped woman with a worn leather bag, her face set with determination, her eyes scanning the horizon, looking for the next woman who needs to know that escape is possible, that survival is achievable, that worthy lives can be built from broken pieces, and that sometimes the most revolutionary thing a woman can do is simply refuse to accept that she's worthless, even when everyone around her insists that's exactly what she is.